see. We'll let the room fill up a bit, and then we'll get started. All right. Let me know when you're ready.
Yeah.
Okay. Hi, everyone. Welcome to our Saturday night star party for May 29th, 2021. I'm Aaron. I'll be the host for the evening, and we've got an exciting program lined up. First off, I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge that we are on the traditional territories of the Coast Salish and Mkwangin-speaking peoples who are custodians of these lands and waters. This area has long been the gathering place of the Songhees, the Esquimalt, and Wasanich nations, long before the arrivals of the Europeans. We are grateful to have the opportunity to live, work, collaborate, and learn here, and we respect the continued connections with the past, present, and future in the ongoing relationships with Indigenous and other peoples within the British Columbia community. We invite all attendees tonight to reflect on the relationships you have to the communities that inhabit this land and share the night sky in wonder. A few quick announcements as well before we get into our main speaker. You have 2 days left to renew your join the FDAO or renew your membership within the month of May and get a free gift delivered to you from our gift shop. So if you haven't already, I encourage you to sign up. That helps us keep going through challenging times like this. Pay Calvin and myself and make sure that we have a fantastic place for you to come back to once things reopen again. As well, please like and subscribe if you're watching us on YouTube. That helps us get the word out to more people. And you can also follow us on pretty much any social media with the tag @FriendsDAO, all lowercase, one word, @FriendsDAO. Also, a quick preview for our next star party. We have James, the director of the Dominion Astrophysical Observatory. He'll be giving a talk on searching for life beyond our solar system. He gave an excellent talk last year about searching for life within our solar system. This takes it to infinity and beyond, I guess. As well, during the talk this evening, if you have any questions, either about our speaker's talk or about astronomy in general, please toss those into either the Zoom or the YouTube chat, and we'll ask those to Calvin and myself for Ask an Astronomer later on in the evening. And unless Ben wants to jump in with anything, without further ado, I'd like to introduce our speaker for the evening, Nienke Van Der Merl. I hope I pronounced that right. Is a Banting postdoctoral fellow at University of Victoria since December 2019, working on planet formation using the revolutionary Atacama Large Millimeter Array, or ALMA telescope. Before this, she worked for 2 years as an NRC postdoctoral fellow at the Hertzberg Institute for Astronomy, just down the hill from where I'm sitting now, and 2 years as a parent fellow at the University of Hawaii. She received her PhD cum laude in 2015 at Leiden University in the Netherlands, where she originates. Nienke is also the founder and host of Nerd Night Victoria, with public science talks in an informal setting every month since August 2018. And I can vouch for those, they're a lot of fun. Nienke, why don't you pop on? Do we have Nienke?
Yes, thank you. I'm here.
Hello.
Maybe it just isn't showing.
Share my screen.
Excellent. Do you want to turn on your video as well? Oh, there you are.
Okay, can you see my screen?
Yes, we can see you and the screen.
I had turned it on. Yeah.
Excellent. You're good to go.
Perfect. Then I'm gonna get started. Good. Thanks. Yeah, and thanks everyone for joining. Very happy about the question. Telescope, more that is important than building telescopes than just being in a dark spot on Earth. So the picture that you see here, that's a picture of me. It's a little bit distorted. I'm not really that tall. Where I'm standing next to the Subaru telescope, and on the other side you see the Keck telescope. This is Mauna Kea in Hawaii, and this is at the beginning of an observing run. And well, it's maybe a little hard to see in this picture, but this is a very, very remote location, and we're going to see why we need that. So just maybe first to clarify, because there are lots and lots of telescopes all over the world, and you may wonder why do we need so many? Why isn't one big one enough? Well, so one of the probably biggest reasons for that is that one telescope cannot observe at all possible wavelengths or at all possible colors or frequencies where objects in the universe are emitting radiation. So and actually the way that we think about light is just visible light. It's what our eyes are sensitive to. It's this little rainbow here in the middle. It's kind of between 500 nanometers and 1 micron. That is the only part that our eyes are sensitive to. But if you look at the full electromagnetic spectrum, there are many more interesting regimes where objects in the universe are actually very bright. So for example, in the UV, we can, and gamma ray, we can observe accretion events. So we can see how objects are accreting material. In the visible light, well, that's no surprise. We can see all these beautiful pictures that we also know from probably any astronomy talk of beautiful galaxies, exoplanets, stars, etc., etc. So these are probably the things that you're most familiar with. But then we can also go to longer wavelengths than visible. So we go into the infrareds and even the far infrared. this is where we can study the cold gas and dust around young stars and planets. That's actually the topic of my research, because they are primarily emitting at these longer wavelengths. And then we can go even longer wavelengths towards what we call the radio. And there we can, again, observe very energetic events, for example, jets that originate from the centers of galaxies. And what is visible light we can capture with a camera, like a CCD. That's almost the same like the CCD, like the camera you have maybe on your phone or your digital camera. Like that technique is pretty well known. But for all these other wavelengths, you need techniques as well, technologies that allow you to convert that signal into a digital signal that we can actually read out, so that we can see the light at that wavelength. So this is just one important aspect of why we have so many telescopes. It's partially because we want to observe at so many different wavelengths, to observe different types of objects and different processes in the universe. Okay, so let's now take a little bit closer look. We're going to start with the visible light, because we're most familiar with that. And then now we're going to just start with a simple telescope. You know, there's me next to a handheld telescope with which we can take a look at the sky. And I've chosen this Lego example because I really like Lego, and there's, in case you're interested in that too, there is a lot of miniature versions of telescopes, astronomers, astronauts, and other space stuff now available in Lego. So feel free to take a look for that. So anyway, here for the comparison, I'm going to put my telescope in my backyard and I'm going to take a look at the sky. Well, what are the things that we're going to see? So I can zoom in onto the moon and I can see all the beautiful craters. I can probably see Saturn's rings. I can maybe see a nebula, maybe some shooting stars, but it's still a little limited, that the amount of things that I can see with my tiny little telescope that I'm looking to. So I want a bigger telescope. And again, Lego example. This is a Lego version of the very large telescope, which is located in Chile, which has a mirror of more than 8 meters in diameter. And so that one actually allows me to see a whole lot more. So let's put this telescope in my backyard, just, to see how that works. And what are we gonna see? Yay! Aliens! Okay, no, maybe not. It's more likely that we're gonna see something like this. We're gonna see stars. We're definitely gonna see more stars than with my tiny handheld telescope. But it doesn't really look that impressive, right? It's just a handful of stars. And the most important reason for that is light pollution, because where I live, which is, well, in Victoria, we suffer you suffer quite a bit from the light that comes from all human-built structures. And I mean, this is a map of the whole world, and you can immediately recognize where the big cities are, because that's where most of the light is being emitted by human action. So what you want to do is to go to a place where you're far away from the city, where you don't have all that light pollution that is essentially making the whole sky brighter, and therefore it becomes harder to spot those faint stars that are far away. So from Victoria, I'm going to go, well, in Ireland, it can potentially go even further, but anyway, we're going to go away from the city, and we're going to put my big telescope there. But now we have a lot of other problems that we need to think about, that are basically hindering our observations. For example, there is clouds. There is rain. It's hard to imagine on a beautiful day like today. As you can see, I got a bit of a sunburn. But remember, in many days in Victoria or here in BC, it is raining. Then we have issues with that we need to think about. That if the temperature changes, metal and other components will shrink and increase. Shrink and expand in size. And if two different components do that at the same time, they may bend each other. So they can, like, stability and temperature is pretty important, because otherwise you're essentially going to destroy your telescope in a short amount of time by those, if you're in a place with big temperature differences. And then finally, just as a bit of an extreme example, anything that creates vibrations in your telescope is going to mess up your image too. And that can be either internal, so you're moving your telescope and something is not entirely lined up, it immediately makes the telescope shake. But of course, you can also think about earthquakes or even a truck driving by. There are many things that will make your heavy construction vibrate, and that will mess up your image. So for some of these issues, we have a solution. I mean, this doesn't solve the problem during observing, but at least we can protect our telescope a little bit. And that solution is called a dome. So we see here the Lego version of the dome of the VLT. The dome is literally a house. It means it's a structure that is built around the telescope that is meant to protect it from all these external factors. You can even close it. Well, of course, then you cannot use a telescope anymore, but at least you don't lose all that money. This is mostly if the wind is really strong, or if it's raining or snowing. So essentially when there is a sandstorm, essentially when you cannot use your telescope at all. But even when the dome is open, you can see there's still an enormous construction present around the telescope that protects it from external factors as good as possible. And it only lets the light go through directly onto the mirror and not onto the rest of the structure. And just to move away a little bit from the Lego comparison, let me also show you the real thing. So this is the real VLT telescope, and this is the real VLT dome that is built around it. And in case you were not impressed yet by an 8-meter telescope, 8-meter mirror, let me show you how big these domes are. So this is me down there. I already mentioned before that I am not that tall, but I am still almost 6 feet. Those domes are a whole lot bigger. They're enormous construction sites. And it's amazing to stand next to them. This is, by the way, on Coronal in Chile, where actually 4 of these telescopes are standing next to each other, all equipped with different instruments and different purposes of studying the universe. Okay, so now we have our big telescope, and we have built a dome around it. There's still another problem that we need to solve, and that is seeing. So seeing is essentially the turbulence in the atmosphere. It is an effect that causes all the air to move around, and that blurs your image. And you can see here an example. Well, here's literally a blurred image of a starry sky. And we have the very famous starry sky from Vincent van Gogh. And I'm saying this the Dutch way because I can. I know you know this guy as Van Gogh. So he was actually quite revolutionary in painting this very annoying effect that astronomers have to deal with, which is what we call seeing, the fact that everything gets blurred by the turbulence in the atmosphere. So a lot of problems with observing invisible light. So why don't we move to a different wavelength just for now, just to get away from all these issues that we have. So so we're going to move to the radio. In radio, we can study these very energetic events, really cool, very mystical, a lot of physics going on that we don't fully understand yet. And the nice thing about radio is that radio emission goes straight through the atmosphere of the Earth, so you have a lot less trouble with seeing, for example. And in fact, the radio telescopes they can look fairly simple, like they can really look like simple antennas or like these big dishes, but even those dishes don't need to be super polished or anything, because radio waves are so much longer than the waves from visible light that you can collect them relatively easy. So it's a lot easier to build a radio telescope, and you have a lot less trouble with weather and other distortions nearby. And also, so this telescope down here on the right is on the lower right. I just want to point out this is the sister telescope of the DAO. This one is called the CHIME telescope of the DRAO in Penticton, and it's I know it doesn't look like a telescope, but believe me, it does. They've already done a lot of amazing discoveries with this thing. So, but in radio, we now have another problem. And that is that radio may sound familiar to you, because this is we all have a radio in our car, or in our home. Radio is the regime where lots and lots of human-made signals are being transmitted, and that can be the music that you're listening to. It can be the internet. It can be military satellite. It can be meteorological satellites. There are and a whole bunch of other satellites that are constantly emitting signals that we are using in our daily life. And what this figure shows, and yeah, so I couldn't find this figure for Canada, but it must be pretty similar. So these are the frequency allocations. So essentially all the frequencies that are given to certain purposes, to all these different satellites and all these different companies that use radio in a certain way. And because all these different frequencies, all these different wavelengths are allocated for this specific purpose, there are only very small fractions that are available for us, that are protected for us, radio astronomers, to do our observations. So these are the things in yellow. And as you can see, very often we even have to share that with some other satellite that may be emitting there. So there's a very small part of the radio spectrum where we can look towards the universe. At many frequencies, we get overwhelmed with all this radiation that comes from our own satellites, from human-made emission. So that means that we can never distinguish that from everything that comes from further away. So this is a big issue in radio astronomy, that we are actually quite limited in where we can do our observations. Another sort of, and this is somewhat related to it, I always think it's pretty funny to show that if you get close to a radio observatory, you will often see signs like this, that you're not allowed to use your mobile phone. And this is a very old phone, but believe me, you're not allowed to use your smartphone either. And yeah, this is written in Dutch, but that is essentially what this symbol means. And also here, at this telescope, they tell you no radio, switch off your radio in your car, switch off your phone. When you're working at a research institute right next to a telescope like this, these are pictures from Penticton, the cables from your laptop itself, even the printer, they all need to be locked in these metal cages in order to protect the radiation from these equipments, so that they don't reach the telescopes, that the telescope don't accidentally pick up those signals. So it's another thing that we need to think about when we're doing radio observations. There is so much human-made signal that can distort what we're trying to observe, that is problematic too. So, okay, we're tired of the Earth. Let's forget about the Earth. Let's go to space. I'm going to become an astronaut. I'm going to put my telescope in space, and I'm going to do my observations there. Then we are done with all the problems, right? Well, except that I'm not really becoming an astronaut. Luckily, I'm allowed to stay on Earth, and I can just wave to my telescope that is put on a satellite, transported out in the universe to do my observations for me. But what is the problem with a space telescope? First of all, money. Space telescopes are so incredibly expensive. You need crazy amounts of money just to get a telescope in space. And this is easily 100 times more expensive than a ground-based telescope. Just to give you some numbers, the Hubble Space Telescope has an estimated cost of around $5 billion. The James Webb Space Telescope, which hopefully is going to be launched later this year, about 10 billion, has an estimated cost of 10 billion. And even a smaller telescope from the 90s, the Spitzer Space Telescope, had a cost of $700 million. And just to put this in perspective, so I know that in Victoria we complain a lot about the prices of the houses, but even with the median price of a house, you're not even close to the cost of a telescope. You need 10,000 houses in Victoria in order to finance the James Webb Space Telescope, just to, you know, give you some comparison. I don't think any of us owns 10,000 houses in Victoria. Okay, other than the cost, say that we have a lot of money, there are other things to consider. So first of all, where do we put our telescope? Because we don't want it flying off into nowhere. We still want to be able to control it and to communicate with it. And then there are different options. For example, we can put it in a low Earth orbit like the Hubble, or we can put it at the so-called L2 point, the Lagrangian point. That's where the James Webb Space Telescope is going. And like the differences between these locations, they have a lot to do with pros and cons of a lot of aspects. So, for example, we want to be able to transfer data from the telescope to Earth. If you are on a low Earth orbit, you can only transmit the data, you know, every orbit for a number of minutes, because when you're on the other side of the Earth, your station on the ground is no longer visible. If you're further away, like L2, you can reach the Earth most of the time. Shielding from the sun. You want to protect your instruments from getting fried by the sun. At the same time, we need energy. So this is why we have solar panels. So we don't want to be completely shielded either. And also there, being close to Earth or further away from Earth makes a difference. Human radiation, of course, being in L2 means that we have no problem at all with the light pollution, and Hubble is actually still suffering from that. On the other hand, having the Earth in your field of view, like blocking part of the sky, is a big issue too. So maybe then you want to be further away again. Cost of the launch is different if you want to go further away versus staying relatively close. And finally, what possibilities do you have to fix your telescope, to repair your telescope if something is broken? If you're close, like the Hubble, that is still possible. You can still send astronauts there, send robots there, fix it. If you're in L2, that is basically impossible, because L2 is really, really far. And for the Hubble, luckily, they had decided to not put it that far away, because the Hubble did have a very big issue that became clear after the launch, after it started taking observations. The images came out blurry. It was almost like you were observing it from Earth with this seeing problem. And it turned out that this was an issue of one of the mirrors that had a tiny, tiny discrepancy. And they were able to fix it by putting in additional optics, so putting in additional tiny little mirrors and other little components. And astronauts literally went there to make that fix. And it helped, because after that fix, the Hubble images looked like this. But the cost of this repair was about $50 million. But again, at least it was possible. If we had put the Hubble far away at the L2 point, we would not have been able to go there at all. And this is one of the reasons why the James Webb Space Telescope is being delayed so much, because we need to be absolutely 300% certain that nothing goes wrong. And there's this funny plot that has been circulating for many years from XKCD, which shows you the planned launch date versus the current date. So back in 2000, they thought that the James Webb would be launched in 2008. Well, clearly that didn't happen. In 2010, we thought it would be 2016. Currently, we are still hoping for October 2021. That is what we're hoping for right now. The good news about the trends, like the fact that it's being postponed, is that at least the trend is slowing down. So if the predictions are correct, it must be launched before 2026. But very hopefully before that. But you can imagine why these delays happen. It's because if only the tiniest issue is found, you have to wait, because you cannot go back to the telescope to fix it. Okay, so maybe space telescope is not the best idea. Let's just go back to Earth, but let's go to a remote location on top of a mountain. So in this case, let's go to Mauna Kea in Hawaii. So sorry, it's actually this figure is not entirely correct. Mauna Kea is right here, right here. So just to remind you, why do we go to a mountain? It is not so that we are closer to the stars, because the closest star to Earth is 41.5 with a whole lot of zeros kilometers away from us. The highest mountain on Earth is 9 kilometers high. Mauna Kea is not even that high. So the improvement in distance is a very, 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 very small percentage. The reason why we go to mountaintops is because of this turbulence in the atmosphere. And there's something very interesting about certain mountaintops in the world, that they have a so-called inversion layer. Inversion layer means that the temperature drops when you go up the mountain, but then it increases again before it drops again. And the result of that inversion layer is that you have a cloud deck almost always present at the mountain, but the summit, so the top of the mountain, will usually be above that cloud deck. So from the summit, you're almost always cloud free. And that is definitely true for Mauna Kea. And that really helps with, well, first of all, vision, because you don't have clouds, but it also helps with how much turbulence you have in the atmosphere there, and therefore the blurriness of your images. So this is something very unique, and there are only a few places in the world where you actually have those conditions. Okay, so we're gonna put our big telescope there, but now we need to think about a whole lot of other practical issues, because say that we want to go observing with that telescope. Are we just gonna hike up that mountain every month? Maybe we want to eat something sometimes. Remember, we are at a very remote location. You cannot just go to McDonald's or call Uber Eats. You actually need to have food right there. You need to have a relatively fast internet connection, because you want to be able to transmit your data back down to your university, or maybe chat with your colleagues. There are even places that are so high that you need oxygen, because otherwise you are unable to think. And finally, you do get tired during observing runs, I can guarantee that. And this is actually a picture of one of my colleagues who fell asleep in the observing room at the one of the La Palma Observatory. So basically, you need something more than just a telescope. You need an entire infrastructure on top of that mountain in order to sustain life on the mountain, possibilities to be there for a number of nights, and to work efficiently. So this is one of the reasons why telescopes are usually grouped together on a mountain, why they don't just do one telescope per mountain. Because building a road up there, it takes a lot of time, takes a lot of effort and money, and then it is much more efficient to combine that. And the same is true for transporting food, transporting, like maintaining an internet connection, electricity, etc. And it's actually, it also makes it really nice, because when you are observing, for example, at Mauna Kea, there is this big house, it's called Halepuhaku, where there's a very big cafeteria, and all astronomers, observers, and technicians, everyone who works on the mountain, eats there and sleeps there. So it's also a way to have a little community right up on there on the mountain. You're not all by yourself all the time. Well, you may wonder, like, but why do you have to be so complicated? Because we have internet now. Can you not observe remotely? Why do you need to go there? Well, that's true, and actually, certainly in the last 10 years, there has been a lot of development in making astronomical observing more and more remote, to avoid the cost and all the effort of traveling towards the telescope. So yes, actually from Victoria, I can control telescopes in Hawaii and Chile. But there's another, so indeed, astronomers don't have to go up to the mountain all the time anymore. But what you have to remember is that telescopes are not things that you can buy off the shelf at Canadian Tire. Telescopes are one of a kind. They are built and developed for this one purpose. That means that they have flaws. That means that they have to be checked and fixed and maintained every single day. So for any telescope, any of the large-scale telescopes that we have, we need to have people going up the mountain every single day to do these kind of things. So even if astronomers don't go observing up on the mountain that often anymore, technicians definitely do. So that's why all the infrastructure is definitely still necessary. There's one other issue that I would like to mention, and this is very specific for Mauna Kea, which is a cultural issue, which has been very difficult for the last 5 or 6 years. Within the Native Hawaiian community, there is a lot of dispute of whether or not a new telescope, the 30-meter telescope, can be built on Mauna Kea, because for Native Hawaiians, this is considered sacred ground. And for some people, that means there shouldn't be a telescope there. No telescope can be built. For others, they actually see astronomy as part of their culture, because Hawaiians descend from the Polynesians who used astronomy and discovered Hawaii that way. So for them, telescopes are part of their culture. And unfortunately, this is still an issue that is ongoing. Yeah, there's a lot to read about that on the internet, but keep in mind that this is a complex issue involving really people from both sides within the Hawaiian community. Okay, then I'd like to end with like a little note on Victoria itself and the Plaskett Observatory, because you may wonder, after all these stories of like finding the best locations on Earth to build telescope, why do we have a telescope in Victoria where it rains so much during the year, especially during the winter? And well, this is a very interesting story, because the Plaskett telescope was built more than 100 years ago, and the plans for building it were even 10 years before that. And it started a bit of in a way as a prestige project. Like, Canada wanted to have its own telescope within the country, within Canada itself. So within Canada, there were a number of places where you could build a telescope. And this guy, William Harper, decided to make a trip. For more than a year, he traveled through Canada, testing a number of different sites. And they're listed in this amazing report, which almost reads like a diary. It's very fun to read. You can find it online. And in every location, he took measurements of temperature, cloudiness, but also more relevant measurements for astronomical observations, like the transparency of the sky, the number of nights that were suitable, and probably most importantly, steadiness and temperature gradient. And it turned out that within Canada, Victoria is the most stable and also the most, or the least temperature variable location in Canada. The temperature difference between day and night and between summer and winter is small here. And because of that, Victoria was chosen to build a telescope, because of these very favorable conditions. Even though there are other places where sometimes the conditions may be better, but a large part of the year they wouldn't be. So it was really the combination of a lot of different effects that were the deciding factor. So yeah, I think I've made clear that telescope are always built on these very remote locations. I hope it is clear why after this talk, all the different components that play a role and that have to be taken into account. I am gonna, one very recent issue that has been rising is the issue of Starlink. Starlink satellites, which are being put in orbit around the Earth, and that are unfortunately disturbing our observations with telescopes. So the Starlink satellites, they provide internet, especially for remote locations, which is of course something that is really necessary. but unfortunately they also create these streaks on astronomical images. Also, this is an issue that is not solved yet, and hopefully we will find a solution for it, because it's essentially a new light pollution issue for astronomical observatories. And so because of that, we are actually looking into other solutions again than either ground or space. There's talk about maybe putting telescopes on the moon, where again you have the issues with how do you transmit your data. There is a mission, Sophia, where they put a telescope in an airplane, and the airplane is flying and the telescope is making observations during those flights. And there are even so-called telescope balloons that are launched in particular on the South Pole, that go to even higher altitudes, or I think up to 60 kilometers above the Earth's surface, where they're kind of between a space telescope and a ground-based telescope. But also these telescopes have issues. For example, this particular one that was dragged all over an ice field for a very, very long time when it landed, and it took a lot of effort to collect the telescope after it was finished taking data. So with that, I'm gonna end my talk, and I will take your questions. Thank you for your time.
Thanks so much, Nienke. I've looked into this kind of topic a little bit, and I learned a few new things as well. Like for radio astronomy, like you mentioned those Faraday cages. Do you have to keep your laptop in there the whole time? Like, can you actually use it, or is the Faraday cage set up like it bounces all the radio away from the telescope?
No, when I was there, when I was visiting Penticton, I had to put my laptop immediately inside that cage and just connect it in a way that I could use it from outside that cage. So it's not a matter of just reflecting it on one side. It had to be closed off. Wow.
So like you had to look at your screen through a grate?
No. So you have to connect it to an external monitor.
Oh, okay, gotcha.
And
so
I mean, they've provided all those connections, so it's not like you have to invent all of that altogether. And it's
okay.
If it goes wrong, it's not like you fry the telescope. It's just that at that time they have to throw away that data because there is this disturbance from a laptop, and that still happens regularly, and they can identify these signals pretty easily. But you would like to avoid this as much as possible.
Of course, yeah. And I guess the cables running from there are shielded.
Yes.
The ones that they give you, yeah. Are you allowed to like warm up your food and stuff? I know there was an initial thing about the fast radio burst where it was from scientists opening the microwave before it was done.
Yeah, there are more stories. There are more stories like that, not just with the fast radio burst, which were indeed caused by microwaves.
Oh gosh.
Yeah, I think we were allowed to do it, but it's something about you cannot open the door before it's done. Because
before the timer's done.
Apparently that's when some signal can escape.
Yeah.
Aaron,
okay.
you know that we have some limitations on Wi-Fi at DAO because of the radio instrument experimentation that goes on.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'm sure.
Yeah. So I do have one question that's in the chat here. Don asks, are there any frequency bands that astronomers wish they had access to that we don't currently have telescopes for?
Well, I assume you're referring to the ones that are blocked by military or satellite restrictions.
Or by the atmosphere?
Yeah, definitely by the atmosphere. So let me first end. So the ones about satellite, I wouldn't know. You could actually ask yourself, maybe we don't know what we don't know, because if we haven't done observations there before satellites were put in place, then we don't know if there's any radiation coming from there. So I don't have an answer for that. There's definitely a large portion of radio when we go to the somewhat higher frequencies, where the atmosphere is again making it more difficult, and there it would be useful if we would be able to go to space for a radio telescope, but that so far there haven't been plans for that.
Yeah. Let's see, I had another one. Leah says, a comment from Leah in the YouTube. Lovely presentation. Thank you for speaking. It had all my favorite things: astronomy, Lego, Hawaii, and another Dutch Canadian.
Thank you, but I'm actually not Canadian. I just live here.
Well, honorary Canadian.
Honorary Canadian. Oh, yes. Thank you.
Ben asks, what's the latest on telescopes on the moon?
Ooh. Well, from what I've heard, it's actually being considered more seriously. So one of the what I mentioned, like one of the problems of putting a telescope on the moon, like you would want to put it on the far side of the moon that is not facing the Earth, because otherwise the Earth is in front of that telescope, like blocking most of the sky. So, but if you put it on the other side, that means that you cannot actually transmit the signals back to Earth. So then you need to put a number of satellites in place that do that transmission. So people are considering a configuration like that. But actually, there are now, I've heard that there are some plans to put something Starlink-like also on the moon.
Oh, interesting.
And that would also cause problems with putting a telescope there. I mean, I don't know exactly how far along either of those plans are, but what we have to keep in mind is that Starlink is a commercial concept, and that means, you know, the money is being made. That means that it can go a whole lot faster than everything we do in astronomy, where we always have to apply for funding, and things just move a lot slower because of that. And as soon as a concept becomes commercial, it can go fast, and also there's going to be competition. Other companies are going to do the same thing, and that is really the issue of Starlink. It's not so much the Starlink satellites that we have now. Maybe by the time that the project is complete, it's going to be problematic. But what's even more problematic is if other companies are going to do the same, and then we really have a shitload of satellites that are creating streaks in our images for all of the time. And the same is true for colonization of the moon. If we want to use the moon as an astronomy site, but at the same time the moon starts to become commercialized, we cannot use that there either.
Right. Yeah, I've heard some ideas of just like lining a crater essentially in like tinfoil and using that as a natural radio dish, something like Arecibo. Let's see. And as for the Starlink, I know that like those satellites are particularly bright, and they can leave persistent streaks on your camera. So even if you toss away the image that they were in, they may still affect later images down the road.
Yeah, well, I mean that's true for anything that is pretty bright, and that is indeed an issue with Starlink. That was actually, and that was only 2 weeks ago, that I was sitting on a patio and on a balcony that evening, so 2 weeks ago on a Saturday, and suddenly we saw a streak of light above us. And at first I didn't understand what it was, because I mean, of course I had heard of Starlink, but I thought that was not visible with the naked eye. But then I talked about it with some people, and apparently they changed the launching time of the satellite, so that's why it was now visible during during the time that we would be able to see it. So that actually was a Starlink satellite, and I could see it with my eyes. Remember, my eyes are not a telescope, so a telescope would be, like you said, the CCD would be totally how do you call that?
Washed out.
Yeah.
Saturated.
Saturated. That was the word I was looking for. It would be totally saturated.
I know they can be visible by the naked eye while they're still like on their way to their final orbit.
So this is indeed, it's like it's early on. It's not like their final location, but in their final location, they're definitely still visible with the telescope, and we've already seen that in astronomy observations.
let's see. Art asks, hi Nienke, can you explain a bit about L2? How is it determined? I'm not sure if he's asking like how we figured out about L2 or why we think it's a good spot for telescopes, or why we're putting the James Webb there.
Yeah, so L2, it's just one of the Lagrangian points. So they were determined probably hundreds of years ago when people started to figure out how planets move around the sun and how orbits or how orbital dynamics work. L2 is essentially a point that moves together with the Earth constantly at the same time. So the advantage of putting a telescope there is that the Earth is constantly nearby, like as nearby as it can be. So it moves together around the sun, so it can continuously transmit signal. Because you can imagine that if you put a telescope in a random orbit around the sun, if the Earth is at some point on the opposite side of the sun, you would have again a hard time communicating with it.
Yeah.
So that's really the advantage of being an L2.
So you get some of the advantages of like having a deep space telescope while also having easy communication to it.
Exactly. Yeah.
The main advantage is that there's stable points of gravity, so that if you get pushed away, you get sent back to it.
Yeah.
And because of the gravity of joint of the sun and the Earth, then the L2 point will be a place where things get sent back if they get perturbed. There are also, interestingly, points in front of and behind the Earth which have the same property. And they're where the Trojan Asteroids, for example, hold up. We've got lots of asteroids in places in L3 and L4 between the Sun and Jupiter. And that's because there are attraction points for the gravity.
Yeah. No, that's what I mean with like following the Earth. It stays in the same. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. Thanks for clarifying that further, Ben.
Laurie asks, would you let us know what you're going to be doing when you go to Leiden?
Well, so I got a permanent position in Leiden. Unfortunately, my position in Canada has always been temporary, so and I wasn't able to find a permanent position here. So I'm going to become assistant professor in Leiden, which means this is the goal of an astronomy career. So I couldn't be happier. It means that I can stay in astronomy for the rest of my life. I can start my own research group. Thank you. I can start my own research group. I've actually already hired 2 PhD students who are going to start working with me in September. And I can start to develop my own plans for not just for the next few years, but actually for the next 30 years, and hopefully work with a lot of people both in Leiden, but also internationally in developing, for example, new telescopes and instruments. So I'm really, really grateful and excited to be able to do all of that. Research-wise, I am going to continue. Yeah, research-wise, I'm going to do the same as what I'm doing now. And I realize I didn't really talk about that today. I've given a talk about planet formation at the DAO before, where I was explaining more about that. But research-wise, I will continue working on the big mystery of how do planets form.
Well, congratulations. We'll be sad to see you go, but we look forward to seeing what you accomplish. Thanks,
and I would love to come visit. And if I come visit in the summer, I'll be happy to come visit the DAO and maybe give another talk as well.
Yeah, we'd love to hear about where your research has progressed. I think we have one final question for you here. Do you have any up-to-date information on the TMT, or specifically where it's likely to be located? I know there are some alternate sites other than Hawaii.
No, I can't say much about that. I mean, the permit has been reapproved already a while ago. The pandemic has definitely delayed further action as well. The alternative location in La Palma is still there, but in principle, the idea is still to put TMT on Mauna Kea. But I cannot. I don't even want to express too much about that because there's still a lot of discussion.
Should have asked Kim Ben that last time because she's actually on the TMT governance committee.
Sorry, I couldn't quite hear that.
Kim Van, who talked to us last time, is actually on the governance committee for TMT, so we should have asked her that.
Oh,
Yes.
yeah.
Yeah.
I did want to say that the feeling in at CFHT from people I've spoken to is that La Palma is not an adequate substitute for
Absolutely.
Hawaii at all, and it's often painted as more of an alternative than it actually is. It's not as high, and the seeing isn't as good.
Yeah.
And
And
it's not as good a site as Mauna Kea.
yeah. And in particular, in the infrared, it's going to be really hard to do meaningful observations when you're at La Palma. That is also a big difference between Mauna Kea and La Palma. It's not only the seeing in optical, but also basically it's impossible to go much into the infrared.
Okay.
If there are no other questions, I'd like to butt in here a bit.
Yeah, I was just about to say, Ben, well, thank you very much again, Nienke. Greatly enjoyed your talk, and I'll pass things along to Ben.
Yeah, I'm not going to keep you for very long. If you look behind me, you actually see a scene from Hawaii, and actually, if I were to have the camera a bit down, you would see the summit of Mauna Kea there too. So thank you very much, Nienke, for your talk. I know that it's pretty much a great honor to be hired back to the location, to the university that you got your doctorate from. So congratulations for that, and wish you best for the future. I just want to make a couple of things, couple of announcements. Everyone is asking us when we will be reopening for live star parties on the hill. And of course, in BC, we have just had the reopening plan notice. I'm actively talking to, FDAO is actively talking to the NRC about this. They haven't yet come up with their response to the provincial reopening plan, but we're very keen to reopen as soon as possible. We've got a schedule for our virtual star parties set out till the end of August, and some in September, which we might hopefully be able to redirect to the center, but there are no promises on that yet. When we do open, however, we're planning the board don't know all of this, but we've got possibilities for a great reopening party that I want you to stay tuned for. We've got some new attractions planned for that, and we'll make announcements for that as soon as possible. Also, we are just about to get a new projector for our planetarium, which is going to be hotter and brighter, and also some new attractions there. So stay tuned. We're hoping to come back with a big bang and a splash as soon as we can back on the hill. And with that, I'll lead you over to, I think it's, give you back to Aaron, who's going to introduce Don and Laurie.
All right, thanks, Ben. Okay, next up we have Laurie, who's going to tell us a bit about the moon and the tides. After that, we've got, well, if we get any questions in, we'll have Ask an Astronomer with Calvin and I. Now, I've got a few interesting space news stories to share with you. After that, Dawn will be talking about geomagnetic storms and what's up in the sky this evening. And there are some clouds threatening to roll in, but hopefully they'll hold off long enough for us to do some virtual observing through some of the telescopes. David's got a couple out in the parking lot that he's got ready for us once it gets a bit darker. We are keeping an eye, hoping to see Venus soon. If we get that in the telescopes, we may do a hard left turn over to that, so we get to see it before any clouds do make it into our sky. So without further ado, let me turn it over to Laurie.
Hi, everybody. My name is Laurie Roche, and work as one of the board members up here at the center, and asked to do a little bit of some work on possibly constellations or constellation stories or something like that. And today, what I had decided to do was another board member, Ida van Schuckman, and I both kind of were talking to each other today and saying, wow, the tide is really low today. And so we both, I was looking out at Brentwood Bay and she was looking out at Island View Beach. And so we just said, well, let's just see what we can do about finding out a little bit about the tides and what was happening with them. And how the moon is kind of part of that, of course. And because we did have a lunar eclipse just very recently as well, then it all just kind of fits in together. So I just wanted to check in, because I think most people here, if they live in this area, and they are very, very comfortable with knowing about the tides and what's going on with them. If you talk to people in Saskatchewan, they sometimes don't have any idea what you're doing, but otherwise out here we do. And I remember very vividly being in a boat and being completely stranded out on Sydney Spit one time when we misjudged exactly where that sandbar was, kind of off of Sydney Spit, and we had to sit until the tide came back up. And I'm sure that some of you have probably had other scenarios. If you've got any good stories about being caught up in the tide, you can put them in the in the chat. Anyway, I'm going to start sharing my screen if I can, and see whether or not I can get this working. And I'm just going to start from here. Sorry, I didn't get this all set up, but I've got this big one. So I'm just talking a little bit about the moons and tides, and here is a lovely boat sitting completely stranded and ready to go. And so part of what we do is talking about the moon and the tides. Is it affects everything that we do, and especially around the areas where we live. But it also is because of that gravitational force and that gravitational attraction that, in fact, things that are tidally locked or tidally pulled together, in fact, kind of are part of our entire solar system, and even part of the universe. So I just wanted to show you a little bit about with Island View Beach today at noon. So Ida was out there. This is taken just at the parking lot. If you're familiar with Island View Beach, there's our lovely mountain in the background, and you can see that the tide is really, really far out, and in fact to the point that there's a sandbar. The sandbar that is kind of well out even farther. You can actually see that is actually open there. And she also had some pictures of people with kayaks and canoes having to walk a whole long way in order to be able to get out. So I was out in Brentwood and took a walk, took a few pictures of where I was. And if you're familiar with the Brentwood Bay Inn, this is a little house that goes down into the marina, and you can see the slope of the ramp. And that I was actually, oh, sorry, I was looking from the ferry and looking out, and this was like completely open, and there were a couple of people just actually down here outside of the picture that had to haul their kayaks down and get in here. And this is quite a large section of a person's property, and you can see again how steep that is. That's exactly how much that tide was really out today. I mean, here these parts are just hardly there. I'm going to show you pictures a little bit later of what happens when the tide came in a little bit more. I did go out, and out by Brentwood Bay, there's a nice little spot right kind of through the town, and you can go out and sit and watch the sun come down, and the sun go down, and there's a little island that's out there, and with just the very top part of it is green, because it stays green and it doesn't get The tide doesn't come up that far, but today I was actually able to walk completely from the base of the street and walk right through and right across the entire basin, get up onto the rocks and go right out to where that section was. It was so low today. It was just actually quite amazing. So, and of course, most of you would be also familiar, if you've ever been up to Parksville, is that, and I know Ben has been up there quite a lot, is that you just can actually go out for, I believe, almost like 1.5 kilometers or something before you hit, when it's low tide in Parksville. That's an amazing place to be. So the tides are caused from the moon, the relationship between the moon and the Earth. The Earth is approximately 4 times larger than the diameters than the moon, and exerts a very significant force. So much so that in fact the moon is actually tidally locked, and it means that when the moon is going around the Earth, it actually only shows the face of the Earth always at the time zone. So that's kind of what we call the near side, and we only ever look. So we're really so used to seeing this part of the moon because we never get to the backside. And I always ask the students in our program as to what they think that it might look like, and also who do they think have ever seen it. And usually by the time the kids get to grade 2 or grade 3, they'll say, yep, it's the astronauts, that some of them did get to go to the back side of the moon. It's not the dark side, but the back side of the far side of the moon, in order to be able to see that. So we only ever see this front side because the Earth is so much larger, and it pulls on the moon and makes it kind of stay in a tidally locked formation as it goes around. But on the other hand, the moon versus the Earth take 2 is that even as the moon is smaller, it actually also has a gravitational force. It's not as big, obviously, at all, but the moon, we all have any mass has got a gravitational force on another body. So even the moon, even though small, has got a gravitational force that is pulling the Earth. And so during the tides, if you can kind of think about this a little bit, here's the moon, and if there is a gravitational pull toward the moon, that this side of the moon, because our Earth is pretty well covered with water, the water is less dense and is able to actually move toward the moon at a much greater amount of pull. These lengths of these lines kind of show that the gravitational pull on this side is much stronger than, say, over here on this side. But in fact, so this causes a bulge in the water, and it causes that part at the high tide. At the same time, the moon, the Earth, even though it's much smaller, the Earth is also moving toward the moon on this side as well, and just enough that it actually causes that this part of the water gets left behind just enough that the Earth is actually kind of pulling toward the moon on this side, and it causes another bulge over on this side. And so in the middle we have the low tides. Now, if you think about it, the Earth is turning kind of constantly, going around all the time, so that in fact, as it's turning over a whole day, we actually go through 2 high tides and 2 low tides. And it just depends on a whole bunch of factors, like way more than I'm going to talk about here, that combine in order to make some of these tides either higher or lower, or in some cases you can hardly even notice the difference between the high tides. I remember one time when I was in the Mediterranean, we were lucky enough to be over there on a boat, and the tides are only like about a foot So you can almost tie up anywhere. There was really no problem whatsoever. They're very, very low tides within the Mediterranean, obviously not here. So that's why we have these two bulges that are on the side, is because of the water moving toward the moon in one thing, and then the Earth moving toward it before the water gets there. Now, so as the moon goes around, we have different kinds of tides, different tides as the gravitational forces combine. So sometimes when we have a moon on this side and we have the sun over here on this side, so at the new moon time, then you've also got, not only do you have the gravitational pull from the new moon, you've also got it from the sun. Now this is of course not anywhere near how this would actually look. But even though the sun is quite a bit larger, I mean, like, incredibly much larger than the moon, because it's so far away that it has some pull, but not really very much. And then, so as the moon is going around the Earth in its rotation over the month, you can see that this pull all the pull would be more, and so that when we have new moons, we actually have got quite a high tide, and that's exactly what's just happened. And in fact, the way that those happen is that it actually happens about 2 days after the new moon happens, which is just about where we are right now. But as it comes around, we get that the forces are less, and they're in different directions. And so that we actually get these different kinds called the spring tides and neap tide. The spring tide has nothing to do with the springtime. It's called that. And so you have these different types of tides as it goes around. But in this place, this is where you're going to get some of the highest tides, and then over on here, you're also going to get a fairly decent set of high tides as well. Now, I pulled this up for today, and you can see on this that today, for May the 29th, that we had a high tide. This was for Victoria, so it's not for Brentwood Bay. This that we get our tides kind of coming around the other way. But for Victoria, a very high tide in here, and also a very low tide in here. Like it was at zero, like down into zero. In fact, even probably a minus. I didn't actually check the actual thing. And then as we get into the rest of the week, kind of coming up into that mid portion of where the moon is, you can see this is the low tide, this is the high tide, this is the low tide. So we get very, very little times right here so next Friday. And then as we get back out to the full moon, again, as this backs over into the 9th and 10th of June, we get back into the higher tides, not quite as high as we have here, and not quite as low, but you can see that. So that's kind of where our tides are going to be. And these little extra little blips in here are where a high tide and a low tide are, like the second high tides and the second low tides. So I was just going to show you, this is now Island View Beach at 6 o'clock tonight. So where Ida went back out and had another look, and this is much less as it was. There's a little bit here, and it's still actually the high tide. The low tide was not going to be until about 10 o'clock tonight, like just in about another hour or so. And so if you went out now, the high tide would be kind of probably up into here, but the high tide was quite apparent. And then this is Brentwood, the Brentwood Inn at high tide. So I took the picture just about here before, and then this is not my picture, but it was one that I found where the tide is right up, and even underneath that walkway, it goes right up to the edge of the shore, and there's hardly any slope to that ramp anymore, so you can really see the differences there with that. So I'm going to leave that right now, and I'm going to stop my share. And if there's any questions or anybody has any other good stories about about there. Ida, I think Ida was online somewhere. If I am there, Ida, do you have anything else that you'd like to say about what happened at Island View Beach today? I don't know whether she can get in here.
Don't see her on the
Maybe not.
list.
Okay.
I'm not sure.
Not sure. So if anybody has any questions or anything, they can ask away.
Yeah.
Thanks, everybody.
Okay. Let's see. So we've got, doesn't look like we have any questions for you yet. So I think, thanks very much, Laurie, for sharing the tides, and
Well, thanks, Laurie.
we'll bring things along. Okay. So I think up next we have Ask an Astronomer. I just checked
Yeah,
in
that's
with
us.
David. Let's see. Clouds are still sort of on the horizon, but it doesn't look like it's quite dark enough to see Venus yet. So
Oh,
he'll
okay.
give me a shout if we need to pop over to that.
So there's still a chance.
There's still a
good.
chance. It doesn't look too bad yet. But it is astronomy, and it is Victoria. Weather can change very, very fast. So we'll keep everyone posted. All right. So I think we've got is Amy there to
Right.
if any questions we
Let's
got
get
from
Amy in here.
Yeah.
Hi, Amy.
Hi.
Hi,
So
you collected some questions for us.
We have a few questions, and just before we get started, if anybody comes up with any other questions, whether it's on YouTube through the Zoom link, just put them in and we'll ask those. So the first question is, how does the ISS avoid being hit by space junk?
Oh, that's a very good question. Do you want to take this one, Calvin, or would you like me to?
So I'm not 100% sure, so I'm gonna take a crack at it, and you tell me how on the mark we are. I assume that it doesn't make any active effort to avoid small space junk, and then the larger ones they keep track of, and I assume it can slightly maneuver, change its course.
Yeah, that's essentially right. So the ISS has sort of multiple layers of shielding around the habitation modules. So this is like layers of essentially aluminum foil and Teflon that are spaced out a bit. And that
Seems pretty straightforward of them. Not really. I guess it technically is a space age material.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know that it's aluminum foil specifically, but they've got like different layers of materials that are very good at absorbing shocks.
Oh, okay.
But they're very thin. This is actually really interesting because they don't try and like stop the meteorite or piece of debris in the first layer. The first layer is there to break it up. So it crashes into the first layer and creates a spray of debris, which spreads out the energy of that impact, and then the layer behind it is more elastic. So something like the Teflon, and that catches those little bits that are more spread out. So it doesn't puncture it, but it does catch it.
That's like a reverse chainmail.
Yeah.
Instead of trying to spread out the impact of like a single point, you're just spreading out the point.
Yes, yeah, very much so, very much so. Yeah, so the first layer is designed to like not stop it, but break up the item, and then the other material is there to catch the bits of debris that spread it out.
Oh, that's cool.
So yeah, that's what they do for things that are like the size of a grain of sand or a tiny pebble or something. For anything larger, though, NASA tracks about 20,000 pieces of debris that are on the order of a few centimeters or larger. And these are all sorts of different things. These are like bolts and fairings from rockets that have gone up that like the fairing comes off once they're out of the atmosphere. It's like a shield that protects the spacecraft. And those will keep going around until they eventually get dragged into the Earth's atmosphere. these are things like tools that have been dropped by astronauts, or pieces of debris from spacecraft that actually have collided before. So there's a lot of space up there, but every now and then something does get a bit too close for comfort for the ISS. And so there have been a number of instances where the ISS has had to do like maneuvering burn, or get one of the like Soyuz or space shuttles that are attached to it to give it a nudge in the right direction so that it's not going to impact. But they usually do this like a week or so in advance of when this thing would even come nearby, to reduce the chances of the collision, and to make it so they don't have to push as hard. Because a little push early on can add up to a big difference in where you are when the close encounter finally comes. Luckily, the ISS has not been hit by anything large enough to be of concern so far. But with more and more things going up, especially things like CubeSats and the like, that's definitely going to become more of an issue in the future.
Yeah, it sounds like a problem that will only get worse, not better.
Yeah.
Okay, next question. Nienke had mentioned that the Hubble is close enough for repairs. Does that mean that they're going to bring it back to Earth once we're done using it?
Oh, I wish. I really
cool.
wish.
Like, put it in a museum when we're done?
So what's the plan for it?
Okay, it's been a couple of years since I've actually looked at this, but as far as I know, there was a plan floated to try and catch it before the space shuttles were completely decommissioned, to catch it and bring it down in one of those. The thing is, the space shuttles weren't really designed to land with a satellite still in them. That's a lot of extra weight, and yeah, and I think with the end of the space shuttle program, it was eventually scrapped. So I think what's going to happen is, once enough bits and pieces of the Hubble stop working, most likely things like its reaction wheels, which help it point in the right direction, they'll eventually deorbit it and make it come down over the ocean.
Common fate of all old satellites. I guess there never has been a case where a mission was sent to like recapture another satellite or vehicle and then come back, aside from like the manned missions, of course.
I think there's a decision point coming up where the current idea is that, or rather, Hubble is supposed to keep operating to the end of next month, actually.
Okay.
And then presumably more decisions need to be made. Of course, the James Webb Space Telescope is supposed to launch in October, and that's been, by my count, 27 years in the making. And in fact, I remember that they hired the first staff for what was then the Next Generation Space Telescope in 1994, which was a year after the servicing mission that fixed the Hubble Space Telescope itself. So I think there's an article on Astronomy magazine that talks about this, so maybe we should just find that link and put it in the chat window.
Yeah, if you can find it, please do.
Yeah, there's a comment on YouTube just mentioning that a lot of the earlier instruments from Hubble are already on display in the Smithsonian. So that's yeah.
So I guess they recovered certain parts of it or something.
Well, they were recovered on the servicing mission.
Yeah.
Okay.
Right? Cool. There was the original WIF-PIC wide field and planetary camera. Then there was WIF-PIC 2. And then there was WF3. There was not a planetary camera in the third one, in the third one, and so forth. So the other thing was that there was an instrument called the high-speed photometer that had to be taken out altogether for the COSTAR replacement. COSTAR being the optical. That's a perfect piece of NASA acronym creation. Corrective Optics Space Telescope Axial Replacement, COSTAR.
Beautiful.
Someone had to have spent hours dreaming that one up.
Oh yes, those backronyms.
All right. Okay, sorry, next question. Are there radioactive elements coming out of exploding stars? And then the second part is, wouldn't it be hot enough, or does that not matter? Like, would it, yeah.
Well, out of exploding stars, that is pretty much where radioactive material comes from. And that second part of the question, like, would it be hot enough? Yeah, I don't know, Aaron, like radioactive material doesn't really need heat, does it?
No, it's the incredibly high pressures and densities inside these collapsing stars that creates the radioactive material. And then once it's created, like once it moves out into lower density regions, it just sort of starts decaying on its own. And in fact, we get a whole bunch of various types of radioactive material that don't really survive for that long. In fact, for type 1A supernovae, so these are white dwarfs that reach a certain mass and then explode. They a lot of the flash, sorry, not the initial flash, but a lot of the light that comes out after the initial flash is actually driven by heating from, I believe, radioactive nickel and cesium that decays fast enough to keep on heating the gas for a couple of days after the initial explosion.
Particular isotopes of those elements, right? That are very unstable. Okay.
Yeah, I don't know the exact isotopes, but
I won't quiz you.
Yeah, we can see their spectral characteristics and the decay times are in keeping with that which we can measure on Earth. So yeah, it's definitely a relevant part of exploding stars and supernovae, but the heat isn't the driving factor of it. In fact, they tend to drive the heat.
Yeah.
Right.
The key thing to realize is that the light curve of a decaying supernova is one of radioactive decay.
Yeah, that's what I mentioned with the
connection is so strong.
Yeah,
I was just emphasizing that. So
okay. Next question is about our DAO, which is, has the observatory been modified in the last 100 years? And what are the plans for modification in the future?
Right, excellent.
I think Calvin might know more about this one than I do.
A bit of it is, a little bit more fresh in my memory. Yeah, when it was first created, of course, it had all of the technology of that time, just that it was the biggest telescope, and I think a fancy design for the mount and how it would sort of slew around. But then around there's a couple key technology improvements that I always like to talk about. One of them is the mirror, which really just made the mirror a little bit easier to service. In the 1970s, I think they went from using silver for the coating to aluminum, which tarnished less often, which means the very time-consuming and probably energy-consuming effort to refinish, put a new coat on, could happen less often because it would just be a bit more robust. And then the other one is, of course, the digital camera, the CCD, or charge coupled device, rather than the photographic plates. That was a major improvement. Could take, it would take minutes instead of hours to collect the same amount of light. And then the other very interesting thing is the tracking mechanism, the thing that makes it so the telescope rotates around at the exact speed to counteract the rotation of the Earth as it's locking onto a star. And so the original one basically involved like a kind of a pendulum, or not a pendulum, a weight and a pulley system. So it would be all of the perfect weight to rotate the whole telescope. And that was actually totally fine, and it worked just well for for most of the time, and I can't remember what the year was, if it was like in the 80s or 70s or something, when they replaced it with an electric motor. But it was I think not like a huge improvement. It was just the technology is now cheaper to just make an electric motor.
Let's see. I'm just looking up something here because so I know that silver is really good for telescope mirrors as the reflective part because it reflects a lot in infrared, but aluminum is pretty much as good in optical light. But if I remember correctly, I don't think that they really could use aluminum 100 years ago. It took a while for the let's see.
I mean, I just by memory or knowledge of vague history, things that are aluminum now were tin back then, right? So I'm not sure exactly what aluminum requires to create or make use of, but
okay, yeah, here we go. So basically, aluminum, like we had the ability to make pure aluminum in like the 1800s, but it was really tricky and really expensive to do. Aluminum really likes to bind with oxygen, and it like makes up a large percentage of the Earth's crust, but most of it's sort of it's bound up with oxygen and other elements. And it wasn't until we were able to use electricity to separate aluminum from the other elements in solution that it really became cheap to use to produce. And that was in the early 1900s. I'm trying to find the exact date, but it was like 1940, 1950-ish.
Wow, that's so cool. So electricity was required for us to be able to make it a proper use of aluminum.
Yeah, it wasn't until like 1940 that we had like industrial levels of aluminum production. And aluminum was actually, just a fun fact, aluminum was so expensive to produce that early on that the top of the Washington Monument in Washington, D.C. in the States it's capped with a like 6-inch pyramid of aluminum, which was this like testament to America's like wealth and industrial spirit, because aluminum was so expensive to produce. It was like capping the Pyramid of Giza in gold, like that type of thing. And then it was like 10 years later that this electrochemical production method came about, and the price of aluminum just like plummeted.
Oh my gosh, that's fascinating.
So that's why they would have used silver at the beginning, is because like aluminum just wasn't available economically to use as a mirror coating until quite a bit later. But it makes sense for Victoria because we don't really need to do infrared astronomy here. We've got way too much moisture in our atmosphere down this close to the ocean.
So are we running out of time, or should we?
Oh yeah, I can.
There's more questions if there's
okay.
If we're not being moved along.
We're trying to keep hold of what David is saying about the
okay.
So if he just shared an image, see whether it's he's got Venus in his sights.
Oh, okay. Let's pop over there and then maybe
we'll go back to questions later. But let's go to the panel.
Good.
Put David Lee on then.
Yeah, Calvin, can you swing us over there?
Yep, I'm working on it.
Awesome.
Hello. Can you guys hear me?
Hi, David.
Yeah.
Yes, we can.
Yeah, so I don't know what happened, but I guess we're in luck. It's not very just a second here. I'll have to do a share, right?
Yeah.
Oh, where did it go? Hang on. I gotta find it.
Did you lose a planet?
How do you lose an entire planet?
I don't know.
Venus is shining black tonight.
Yeah.
I don't know how I lost it.
Oh
I
no.
know. Was I telling the truth? Okay, just a sec.
Your pictures
Can you
don't
zoom
lie.
out? Hmm. Did you lose your tracking?
I'm not tracking, actually. I didn't think I would need to because I was waiting for it to go into the hillside. Let me see. I can still. Oh, I think we missed our opportunity. It's in cloud.
Oh, it's in cloud. Oh,
check
darn.
back. Check back. I'll
Okay.
interrupt you again.
All
Please
right,
do,
thanks.
All right. We probably have time for one, maybe two more questions, and then we'll pop over to Dawn.
Okay.
Aaron, I don't know if you can hear
Oh
me.
yeah.
Yeah, but if you have more questions, please take them. I can wait. So
Oh,
Okay.
okay.
Sounds
right,
good.
thanks,
We'll
Tom.
we'll go through our questions then. They're always fun.
Okay, so Leah's asking, so let's go back to space. Let's leave Earth and go back to space. So how much longer can we maintain communication with Voyager 1?
Okay.
Right.
That's a good question. It sort of depends on how much effort we're willing to put into it. Yeah, so Voyager is powered by a radiothermal isotope generator, an RTG. Basically, it uses the decay of plutonium to run a thermoelectric device that gives it a couple watts of power. Like this thing just barely sips power. Like the engineering on these things is pretty incredible. But it's, I think the half-life on an RTG is something like 10 years. So it's been 40 or so years since
Yeah, it's been about
started.
40 years.
43.
Okay, 43.
Yeah.
Thanks,
So going with a 10-year half-life, it's running on about a 16th of the power that it started out with. So like they have to be very careful about like which instruments they're turning on and off, and like doing communication in short bursts because the radio antenna takes a fair amount of power to use. But as long as it's able to power its antenna, then the real deciding factor is on like how sensitive our radio antennas are here on Earth. When Voyager first started going out, like we didn't have as big of radio telescopes and antennas as we do today. And so if we were stuck with that technology, we would have lost track of it probably as it went out past Neptune or so. Like when they launched it, they knew they had the ability to keep track of it through all the major planets at least. But in the decades since, we've expanded what's called NASA's Deep Space Communication Network. And this is a set of radio telescopes that, radio antennae that NASA uses that are sort of spread out around the world. We partner with different countries that communicate with spacecraft. And this is used to talk to like the Parker Solar Probe and the Mars rovers and all of these different things. But as its capacity and sensitivity and bandwidth have increased, it's been able to keep track of and communicate with Voyager for longer and longer. So if we really squeeze the last little bits out of that RTG, we'll probably be able to keep talking to Voyager for maybe another decade or so. I wouldn't bet on much longer than that.
It still sounds impressive that we would be able to communicate with it still. Yeah.
So I think you've answered the second part of the question, which was what are the challenges of transmitting to spacecraft built with the older technology? But I think you've kind of covered it there, and they're kind of doing things to try to hang on.
Yeah, go ahead.
Aaron, do you think that if we launched a Voyager with today's technology, we would be able to it would be able to run even longer or better, or is like an RTG like that technology is pretty much set in stone? Or
well, we kind of did. That's the New Horizons probe. So the New Horizons is also running off an RTG. The RTG technology is pretty much like a standard kit, so to speak. NASA's developed it. To develop a new one would take a lot of work and regulatory approval. So they've got sort of the one design that they just keep using, and they rely on the other pieces of it becoming more energy efficient and the like.
Okay, cool.
But New Horizons, we may not be able to communicate with it for longer than we would with Voyager, like in terms of time, but we'll definitely be able to communicate with it further out, just because of New Horizons' sheer speed. Basically, they built the smallest spacecraft they could, put it on the largest rocket they could, and just yeeted it to the edge of the solar system so it would get to Pluto within the scientists who built its lifetimes. Yeah, it's still going. It's out passing by a couple of other Kuiper Belt objects on its way. I think it's done one flyby since. Yeah, the Ultima Thule flyby, that weird pancake peanut shaped rock or piece of ice, and then it'll hit at least, I think, 2 other Kuiper Belt objects on its way out. But we'll see what it does once it reaches the edge of the solar system where Voyager is.
Yeah, we'll put it to the test.
Yeah, it's definitely got better cameras than Voyager, but I don't know if it has the same sort of like magnetic sensing apparatus and like plasma particle
different instruments. Sure, yeah.
Yeah.
Is there time? Is David ready, or is there time for another one?
As far as I know, it's Venus is still in cloud.
Okay. So I have a question from one of our younger viewers tonight, who has a new telescope, and she would like to know, when is the prime time to view from her telescope? When should she go out? And actually, I feel like David's answering that question right now.
Not tonight, apparently.
Yeah.
Calvin, do you want to take that one?
I think all I will say is it depends on the things you want to look at. You know, there's different times that interesting things, different planets, and the moon is up, or when it's a little bit better than not better. But yeah, other than that, I don't have a whole lot of wisdom for backyard telescope viewing.
I can add a little bit to that.
I know we've got an astrophotographer, member of the astrophotography club at UVic on, Jonathan. If he wants to jump in here, he's welcome. But basically, yeah, it depends on what you want to look at. If you want to look at like the moon, then you want to see it at about half phase, and then
Venus again now.
Yeah, I see that. So we'll switch over to him as I finish answering here. So if you want to look at anything deep sky, so things like galaxies and that sort of thing, you want to ideally get somewhere really dark, so away from a city, and then we want to make sure that the moon isn't up, so that you don't get that extra light, because the moon actually lights up the whole sky around it and can make some fainter objects more difficult to see. All right, David, you're on screen, so let's see what we got here. You are on mute.
Yeah, I'm here. So let's grab it while we can.
Yeah. Everyone's getting the full astronomy experience, clouds and all.
Absolutely.
Oh, there we go.
There we are. So it's heading down towards the horizon, so it's getting some of the color from the sunset, so it's there. It's actually heading into a bank of cloud. I just warn you that.
Okay.
But I think we're good for a few minutes. I'm actually hoping it will descend into the hillside. We'll get that kind of blinking effect. But there should be colored, but that's Venus.
That's beautiful.
Can we zoom in enough to see the phase at all?
I can zoom in, but I've got it binned right now. But let's just have a look.
Oh, Well, it's not
Hard to
quite a
tell.
circle.
Yeah, hard to tell.
Yeah. Now, that jiggling around that Venus is doing, that's not from the telescope itself. That would be from the atmosphere, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Actually, as you head to the horizon, the layers of atmosphere are actually thicker there. So this is perfectly normal, to be expected. Now, when you want to look at planets in earnest, you want to see them higher up in the sky. That's a tip
although
for
that
the
is
people that want to look at planets.
that's harder to do with Venus, just because it doesn't get very far from the sun in the sky.
Absolutely.
It's not called the
last
noon
night
star.
we watched Mercury and Venus join the sun very, very shortly after the sunset, and they followed very quickly after.
Yeah. So to tie it back to our speaker this evening, this jumping around from the atmosphere as the light goes through multiple layers of the atmosphere is what Nienke was talking about when she talked about seeing. So it is especially pronounced when you're looking right at the horizon, but even when you're looking straight up, this is an effect that can blur a star's image on your camera. Like if you imagine this, David's camera is taking pictures very, very quickly, only capturing light for a fraction of a second at a time. But if you were trying to take a longer exposure image like that, it's jiggled right off the screen, but you saw that Venus became a whole bunch of streaks there for a moment. That's what you get when you have bad seeing and you're trying to look at a star. And if you were trying to look at it,
we've lost our signal, I think.
Okay.
So we'll have to wait a bit.
Okay. All right. We'll pop back over here. But yeah, so if you were trying to watch a star like that and take a longer exposure image, it would just keep jumping around and smear out into a big blob on your telescope rather than be a nice little point. And so this is why Victoria was chosen, because its atmosphere doesn't do that as much as pretty much anywhere else in Canada. Very low turbulence in our atmosphere. And it's even lower in places like Mauna Kea, mostly because they're above most of the atmosphere that has that turbulence. So that's why we like to build telescopes up high. This is also what causes stars to twinkle. So you may notice if you ever look at stars near the horizon, especially like Sirius, it'll flash and some of the brighter stars can even appear to change color due to this bouncing around of the light. Sirius especially gets mistaken for a UFO or an alien spacecraft a lot, because it actually does appear to change color while standing perfectly still in the sky. Okay, let's see. It's about 9:50 here. Do we want to get switch over to Dawn, or do we have one or two more questions?
There's just one more question if you guys want to take it, or you're...
Sure, let's do that, and then we'll pass over to Dawn.
Yeah, one last question.
And then
Okay.
Once Dawn's done, we'll hopefully get through these clouds. It is starting to get dark enough to actually look at stuff other than planets, so that should give us just enough time. And once Dawn is done, we'll get a go or no go from David on what the observing conditions are looking like. All right,
so
Amy.
This might be a quick question.
Okay.
When we get to Mars, what will the temperature be?
I remember that I think it's like minus 60 Celsius on the day, and then when it's night, it's even colder.
Yeah.
Balmy.
It's cold. Yeah. Just like on Earth, it depends where you are, but pretty much anywhere you are on Mars, it's going to be very cold. Yeah, it doesn't get like, I think I think the hottest we got to on Mars was about minus 40. And it just so happened that like in Winnipeg that day, it was also -40. So it was the same temperature on Mars and Earth at the same time. That doesn't happen very often. Usually Mars is a lot colder, cold enough at the poles to have carbon dioxide ice, dry ice on the surface. So that's at least -70 Celsius, if not much colder. So yeah, you'll want a very, very warm spacesuit to hang around in.
Aaron, I want to ask your input on this. So Mars has very little atmosphere. So the temperature, when we say the temperature, that's the surface. So that's like just on the ground though. Like, do you think there'll be there is much temperature variation, like centimeters or meters above the surface?
It depends on whether you're talking about like the temperature of the air or what temperature you feel. So
right.
I would imagine that the temperature of the atmosphere is a fair bit warmer than the surface. I don't know that for sure, but that's what I would guess.
Right.
Yeah, just because the atmosphere can sort of average out the temperature over the whole surface. Like especially at night, the air would be a lot warmer. But the surface, because it can't pass that temperature to the air very efficiently because the air is so thin, it can only radiate. So like it would get quite warm during the day and then relatively quite warm during the day and then cool off very cold at night without changing the air temperature too much. So if you were in a spacesuit, like you wouldn't have to insulate the outside of it very much, but you definitely want to insulate the feet and probably have like some struts going out. So like if you fall over, you're not going to freeze your back to the surface.
Right.
Like over most of the spacesuit, I don't think you need too much insulation.
Okay.
Right.
Thanks. I think we're about out of time.
Yeah.
Thanks, Amy, for passing those questions along.
And thanks to our viewers for asking them. Those are great. So pass things to Don.
Okay. Hi, everybody. And we're going to cut away to David. He's hopefully going to interrupt me when he's ready to go. And then we'll just, we'll come back to what I'm doing after that, I expect. So tonight I'm going to talk about a few different things, and I may even get through all of this before we go over to David. I think we're going to switch over to him at about 10 after or thereabouts, but we'll wait for his call on that. And so let me just share my screen, and I'm going to hopefully share my entire screen here. Okay, and so you should see, just going to hide this here. So you should see the night sky right around now, and we're looking over towards the northwest. And you can see that Venus and Mercury are very low. They were actually at their closest together, closest apparent approach last night, but they're, I think, something like about a degree apart right around now. I'm just going to bump this time up here to make it a little bit more accurate. You can see they're getting very low down towards the horizon, but you can still see that there's a lot of twilight happening. And that's a bit of an issue at this time of the year. And it actually doesn't get truly dark until midnight, believe it or not. So this time of the year, we actually don't start to see full-on darkness until midnight. And it's not completely dark, or pardon me, it's only completely dark for about 2 hours and 24 minutes. And as we go on towards the solstice, astronomers will find that they only have about 40 minutes of total darkness at this time of the year. So it's a pretty short shift for astronomers at this time of the year. But after 10 o'clock, you can see that there's still some things, starting to come out of the twilight. And you can see that, for example, I'm just going to turn the constellations on here, that we have Gemini down behind the trees there. We have Castor and Pollux, and there's Mars there down to the lower left of them. So you can see these two stars that are almost horizontal, and then Mars getting down low in the sky. And as David was saying, this is not really a great time to look at Mars through a telescope, because when you're looking down this low, you're looking through many more layers of air than if you're looking straight up above you. But nevertheless, you can find it and probably see a little bit of the disk through a good little telescope. So let's just have a look over here towards the right. We can see that there's a bright star called Capella, and it's actually uh, a pair of double stars. And so that's down on the horizon, and you'll see that twinkling furiously as it gets down lower in towards the horizon. And as we move towards the north, we can see the W-shaped constellation Cassiopeia, and above that, Cepheus, which is actually going to come up in conversation a little bit later. And because there's a star that is of interest there, we might be able to do some observing it. And if you look up above, you can see the North Star, but you can also see the Big Dipper, and at this time of the year, it's spilling its contents out down towards the horizon. Now, there is something that's that I'll talk about in just a minute or two. It's something called the Hubble Deep Field. But first, I just should mention something about the moon. It's at last quarter on Monday. And remember, the last quarter refers not to its shape, but rather its position in its orbit. So it's moving into the last quarter of its orbit. And so this is actually prime time for astronomers, because when the moon's out of the sky, then we're getting into full nights of darkness, and we can see our darker objects, even though the window at this time of the year is fairly small. Let's just move around a little bit more down towards the west now, and we can see there's also the bright star Vega is coming up, and that's high overhead in the summertime. And so that's noteworthy as well. And the Milky Way is coming up. So in the last talk, we learned about or I believe the one before that, we learned about how the Milky Way is high up above us in the early morning hours. So let's just move back to Ursa Major. And so this thing called the Hubble Deep Field, which you might have heard about, is a very, very tiny spot in the sky. It was made up of hundreds of images that lasted in total of a couple of days. And there's been, the whole point of it really was to really try to find what was there. It looked like a completely blank piece of sky. And it's such a tiny piece of sky, it's hard to really even imagine. It's the size of the queen's eye on a dime held at arm's length, if you can imagine that. And in that, to find that spot with your eye, if you're wondering where that is, if you look at these two stars, the star in the handle of the Big Dipper and this star on the edge of the bowl, it makes pretty close to an equilateral triangle. So the Hubble Deep Field is actually right over around that little spot there. And I'm just going to now show you what that looks like. You're probably going to see my messy desktop here for a second. But there it is, and it contains about 3,500 galaxies in it. There's almost no stars. The stars are just the little things with spikes on it. But try to imagine that, a little spot in the sky that is the size of the queen's eye and a dime at arm's length contains that many galaxies, and it's like that all over, we think. So there's something else that's kind of special that's happening in the next couple of weeks, and there's actually going to be an annular eclipse, and this will actually start in Ontario, and it'll be a partial eclipse for some other parts of eastern Canada, starting at about the border of Saskatchewan and Manitoba. And the path of this eclipse, for seeing it like this, seeing this ring of fire as it's called, is actually going basically straight up through James Bay, Hudson's Bay, Baffin Island. It just skims the North Pole of the Earth and then dives down into Russia. And the reason we see it like this and not a total eclipse is because the moon happens to be a little bit further away in its orbit, and so it's about 6% smaller than the apparent size of the sun. So that's exciting, and we won't be able to see any of it here, even the partial phases here in Victoria. But of course, you can watch all of these things online and see some great photos afterwards. So what I really wanted to talk to you about tonight was something called a geomagnetic storm. And in fact, we had one earlier this week, and they're happening all the time, basically. But back on May 15th, we had actually the 100th anniversary of the largest geomagnetic storm of the 20th century. And it's not talked about that much. We usually hear about another event that we'll talk about in a few minutes, but it's worth just as going back and having a look at what happened 100 years ago. So this geomagnetic storm took place from May 13th to May 15th, and basically what happened was the sun interfered with the magnetic field of the Earth. And these lines here that you're seeing are basically the trajectories of particles, charged particles, in the magnetic fields of the Earth. So you can kind of see where the magnetic field lines go around the Earth. And let's just have a look at the sun compared to Jupiter and the Earth there. And there's a solar astronomer said a few years ago that the Earth responds to we say that if the sun sneezes, the Earth catches a cold, and you can see why, because the sun is very large and very dynamic, and there's a lot of activity on it, and these flares and prominences and so on spew a lot of material out into space, which we're going to talk about. So a geomagnetic storm is caused by a number of different things. So when we get a big eruption on the sun, what can happen is we'll immediately get blasted at the speed of light with X-rays and ultraviolet, and this can cause ionization in the upper atmosphere. And one of the things it can do is it can actually interfere with electronics, and it can also cause GPS navigation errors, because it'll actually expand the ionosphere and the signals don't come through as they normally do, and so we can start to get big position errors with our GPS. The other thing that we'll get a few hours later typically is energetic particles, and they're moving only slightly slower than the speed of light. So these are electrons and protons, and they can damage satellites and damage the electronics. And finally, we get what's called coronal mass ejections. We'll talk a little bit more about this. And this is magnetized plasma. And typically what happens with a coronal mass ejection is that there'll be magnetic field lines on the sun, and they'll actually be very strong lines and be blocking the flow essentially of solar material off of the sun. And then what will happen is they'll break down, or they'll combine with other magnetic field lines, and suddenly you'll get a big eruption of material off of the sun. And this comes blasting towards the Earth, and this is the main cause of problems with the bigger storms. So how often does this all occur? There's about 1,000 geomagnetic storms in a typical 11-year sunspot cycle, and there's typically more around solar max. But fortunately, they're not all aimed at us. There's in a solar cycle, there's about 21,000 flares and 13,000 clouds of ionized gas or plasma that are sent off of the sun's surface. So let's go back to the 1921 event, and let's just here are some headlines from those days, and you can see that the New York Central Signal System was messed up from that, and in fact, parts of Grand Central Station caught on fire. So there's a train control tower there, and because it had a lot of wires going up to it that went out to the various signals and so on, there's the currents that were set up from the changing magnetic field of the Earth, and all these charged particles caused fires to break out. And in fact, there were fires that also happened in Canada and happened in Europe as well. And you can see references to it in some of these other articles about France and so on. So let's just have a look at what caused this. And so this is a sketch of the size of the sunspot that occurred around that time, and it was a sunspot that was about 151,000 kilometers wide, essentially, and it was about 12 times the size of the Earth in the longest dimension. So it was very big, and in fact, if you had proper protection for your eye, you would easily be able to see it on the surface of the sun. And not only did it set fires in some of these places like the train station, but it also knocked out telegraph service across the entire United States and blew fuses all over the place. So these very large geomagnetic storms are often compared to something called the Carrington Event. And so what is the Carrington Event? Well, it's something that took place in 1859, and Carrington was an English amateur astronomer. He was from a very wealthy family, and so he was able to pursue his hobby full time. But he almost didn't see it because his father passed away the year before, and he was forced to spend more of his time taking care of the brewery business instead of looking through his telescope. But fortunately, he was looking through his telescope, and he saw a massive event on the surface of the sun. And he, like any good astronomer, he called out to try to get other people to look at it. But astronomy is a pretty solitary occupation, and fortunately nobody was within earshot, and so he was the only one who saw the brilliant flare on the surface of the sun. And so this was such a massive event that it said that the northern lights that were caused by it were bright enough that gold prospectors up in the Rocky Mountains were awakened in the middle of the night. They thought the sun was coming up, and so it was a tremendous auroral storm that was actually seen all the way down to the equator as well. And like the later storm, telegraph stations caught on fire in North America and Europe, and it's reported that telegraph operators were zapped. No one died, fortunately. And but let's just have a look at one of these types of events, and let's just have a look at an event earlier this week. You can see one of these flares on the surface of the sun, and I'm going to scroll down here, and hopefully we'll see a coronal mass event that took place yesterday. And you can, this is just on loop so you can see it, and it's spewing material out. So the Carrington event was much greater than this. As you can see, it's not exactly very targeted either. It sort of fans out, but sometimes we can get hit straight on and see one of these massive events. So, okay, so let's shut that down. And so how often do these events occur? Let me just move ahead. How often do these events occur? Well, they do happen reasonably often. There was a large one in 1967, for example, and it messed up the defense radar in North America, and it almost started a war because the protocol at that time was that if the radars were jammed for the NATO defense system, they would launch the bombers to start a counterattack against the Soviet Union. And in fact, they did actually launch bombers at that time, but the astronomers managed to get the word in that it was actually not a human cause, but it was in fact caused by the sun. Also in 1972, there were about 4,000 American sea mines that were detonated in the Vietnam region because of changes in the magnetic field of the Earth. And so those are magnetic mines. So if a ship containing iron passed by them, the mines would go off. But in fact, they were triggered by the sun. In 1989, as many of you probably know, the power was knocked out in Quebec for about 9 hours, and the transformer also failed at a nuclear power plant down in the States. And so if a Carrington-like event happened today, it would likely cut power to hundreds of millions, if not billions of people. And just as an aside, in 1989, also a solar storm knocked out the power and knocked out the Toronto Stock Exchange as well. So the last time we had a big event like that that was a near miss was in 2012. And Toronto Stock Exchange. Yeah. Do you need to stop at this point? Hello?
You can continue.
Okay, thank you. So the last time this happened was 2012. And so if we'd been hit in 2012, it would have been very similar to what happened in 1859, except that we have a lot more infrastructure at risk now. So up until recently, our understanding was quite poor of these events, and it's said that it was said about 10 years ago that our understanding of space weather was similar to what our weather prediction capability was in the 1950s. So just ordinary atmospheric weather prediction. So not very good, in other words, where they could predict things about an hour or two in advance. We've learned, however, that it's not just about storm intensity. These coronal mass ejections have a polarity, and if the polarity is northward, then the Earth's magnetosphere is less affected. But if the polarity of the mass ejection is southward, then we're in big trouble, and it can really mess up the magnetic field lines of the Earth. One of the big things that's happened, especially in the last 20 years, is that the magnetosphere of the Earth has been mapped a great deal. And this actually started back in the 1950s because we really didn't know much about the structure of the magnetosphere around the Earth. And in particular, in the last 10 years, they're watching what happens as these events, the smaller events, the geomagnetic storms, happen, and the Earth's magnetic field is interfered with. And so we're starting to learn a little bit more and predict what's going on in terms of the interaction between the Earth and these solar storms. We've learned that the Van Allen radiation belts are strongly affected, and it can actually cause them to dump their charges into the atmosphere of the Earth, or cause the Van Allen radiation belts to expand. So that's something that's been learned about this as well. If they expand, it's a bit of a problem because many GPS satellites are in the outer Van Allen radiation belts, and it's possible that they could be crippled from that as well. As for power, there's been a lot of efforts in 1989 to protect the power grids around the world, but this is very uneven from country to country. BC Hydro actually carefully monitors solar storms, and they can do shutdowns to protect the grid. And they also have series capacitors in the transmission lines to absorb some surges. So they've actually built in surge protectors, believe it or not. And so we're kind of near the forefront here in BC for protecting ourselves from these solar storms. But in the UK, they've actually got they have a supply of spare transformers in case their regular transformers blow, and they have regular drills to deal with a major space weather event. And one problem, however, is that many places are building transformers to withstand a 1989 type storm, but not a 1921 or 1859 type storm. So that's a big issue. So they're designing to recent standards, but not for the major storms. And as for GPS, in 2015, solar storms knocked out the global positioning systems in the US Northeast. And as we get more moving towards self-driving cars, this is going to become a bigger problem. And GPS is an issue for another reason. It's not just positioning. It's also because a lot of our financial infrastructure now depends on the clocks associated with GPS satellites. And so if they get knocked out, the timing of banking transactions and so on can also get messed up. And so this is perhaps the biggest concern with this, is that a lot of our financial infrastructure can collapse. So certainly it's of really big interest now to make sure that we understand these solar storms and can deal with them. Just a few other asides, when we do have big solar storms, you don't fly over the pole in a jet aircraft, because that's where the magnetic field lines dip in. And so they reroute airliners south. And ground composition, we've learned, actually makes a difference. So, for example, in some areas, the charge that's through the ground itself can be about 1 volt per kilometer, but it can be up to about 25 volts per kilometer in other areas due to the ground composition. And so if it's metamorphic rock or igneous rock, like volcanic rock, then those tend to have a much bigger voltage difference per kilometer, and other areas where there's a lot of sediments have a fairly small voltage difference, and so there's not as much of a problem. So here in BC, we're not as much at risk as, say, for example, the northeast of the United States as well. So over the next while, we're going to be looking at the sun more and more as we get towards the solar maximum, which is going to occur somewhere around November 2024 to 2025. And we think now that the odds of a Carrington type event in a given year are about 1%. So there's about 30 events per 150 years. But in terms of actually hitting the Earth, it's about 1% per year. So we do also have the advantage now that we have satellites that are up in space and space probes out there. And the hope is actually to put in a space probe much closer to the sun than the current space probe that's close to the sun. The name escapes me off the top of my head. Maybe if you can remember, Aaron. But the Parker probe, that's it. That's going to within about 9 solar diameters, but they're hoping to get solar monitoring satellites into about 3 solar diameters. So obviously they're going to have to invent some new technology. And I'd just like to end with an interesting note that I came across that said that a survey of newspaper articles over the last 160 years or so showed that actually public awareness of geomagnetic storms was actually higher prior to about the 1950s. And this seems odd, but it was regularly front page news when there was a large geomagnetic storm. And so one of the things we're doing with our solar telescope here is we're hoping to just raise general awareness about the sun and its interaction with the Earth. And so here's a photo of it. So this is a 90 millimeter hydrogen alpha telescope, and it's a great system. It can be used to in a couple of different ways. I can maybe describe that if I have time. But basically, it looks at a slice of the solar spectrum right about here. And what it's just in the red part of the spectrum, about 650 nanometers. And what it's doing is it's looking at this area of emission above the visible sun surface. And this is called the chromosphere. So it's in about 5,000 kilometers above the visible sun surface. And this is where all the interesting action happens. So if you're interested in solar activity, solar flares, prominences, and things that could affect affect the Earth, then this is what you'd be interested in looking at. So I'm really hoping that over the next few months that we start to use the solar telescope more on Saturday nights and give you more views of what's going on with solar activity. So I think that's about it, and I'll just see if there's any questions at this point.
Thanks, Don. Yeah, concerning stuff. Like I'm glad to hear that BC is on top of shoring up their grid, because I remember hearing about this sort of thing when I was in like elementary school and being like, oh no, what's going to happen? But it's good to see people are taking care of it. Let's see. I don't see any questions in the Zoom chat, but if Amy sees any in the YouTube chat, she can pop in and say hi. But let's ask David, how are we looking on the telescope?
I have a sorry tale to tell.
Oh,
about
no.
the one that got away. We caught it in a branch and then we lost it after that.
Okay.
We had a very valiant attempt.
Mm-hmm. Is there anything else to look at, or is it still too light out?
I'm gonna probably pull in somebody. Did you want to hand over to me now?
Actually, could I just show? Sorry, Aaron, could I just show a couple more pictures taken with our
you go ahead
telescope?
and then pass it over to me.
Sure, this will just take a couple.
Sounds great.
Okay.
Yeah.
So here we go.
We'll come back to you, David.
All right. So this is a full disk image made with the same sort of telescope as we have, the very same model. And you can see prominences following magnetic field lines off of the limb of the sun, and also these bright areas. And again, we're looking at the chromosphere of the sun, not what we call the visible surface. And probably back in grade school, you did that experiment where you had a magnet underneath a piece of paper and dumped iron filings on it, and it might have looked something like this. And this is actually the surface of the sun. But that's exactly the same reason that you're seeing these patterns. The material is actually following the magnetic field of the sun. So the sun is extremely active magnetically, and here's I believe it's called a floccule. Maybe you can correct me, Aaron, but it's sticking out of the chromosphere, and it might be the beginnings of a prominence. But again, following the magnetic field of the sun. So we're hoping. So hopefully we'll, if we can reopen in the next few months or maybe next year, then we'll be able to give you a view through this telescope directly and be able to see detail like this on the surface of the sun, as long as the sun isn't too close to the horizon, as usual. So early in the evening, perhaps.
Yeah, well, in the next couple weeks here, that we'll have more of that than we will of evening observing as we get closer and closer to the solstice. But yeah, that picture is really cool. It almost looks like a little tornado, but it's probably an arch prominence seen like edge on.
Yeah,
So losing the back of it behind.
It might be called a filament, actually, in this case, I think.
Okay.
So, yeah.
Cool,
Okay,
cool.
That's about it for me.
Sounds good. Thank you so much, Don. All right. How are we doing, David? Anything
Yeah, I think we're good. I have Plan B. So
okay.
So I have I actually
Plan
have
B
a local.
Beetlejuice?
Pardon me?
Is Plan B Beetlejuice?
No. So I have a couple of things for you tonight. I have a local astronomer with an interesting story to tell. And then after that, hopefully I have Brock Johnson here, who's part of the EAA team. He has some work that he's done recently, and he's got a very pretty garnet star in the elephant trunk. So you'll see what I mean when we get to that part of the episode. So I don't know, Cameron, are you online?
I'm here, David.
Excellent. Oh, hey, you're Astronomer Rad friendly.
Yeah.
We probably should explain that joke to some people. Astronomers are usually not lit like me. We normally use red light to preserve our night vision. So anyways, I'd like to introduce to you Cameron. He's got an interesting story to tell.
Hi, everyone. Good evening tonight. I'm here. I'm actually down in the shadow of the DAO. We can actually see it from where we live. My wife, Lisa, is in the dome. This is our dome here. We're going to be telling the story on Monday night at our Astro Cafe with the RAS Victoria Center. So if you're interested in the whole story and the photos, but we actually liberated this dome from Colwood, and where I actually watched it being built back in 1992 outside of my Science 10 classroom. So Lisa, can you open her up? And we've been doing a lot of restoration on it, trying to bring it back. So she's just going to open up the shutter here and get the cranks going. And yeah.
So you have remote control, Cameron?
No, I do. It doesn't work on the dish. Yeah, exactly. It doesn't work on the dishes or anything like that, but it seems to work. It works pretty good on the dome. Yeah, so she's inside. She's opened up. I'm cheating here. I got a white light over my shoulder because it is getting a little bit dark over here. And then she'll drop the lower flap here.
Oh, look at that.
Yeah, so that's really handy actually. The way Bill Allman built this back in the early 90s. That way the shutter can actually go past 90 degrees, so we can shoot the zenith with when we're taking photos and stuff. So that's a nice little bonus. It's well designed by Bill. Lisa will probably spin the dome. Can you spin it a bit? Yeah. So there we go. She's just going to bring it around. There we go.
Hey, I want one of those.
yeah. It's pretty cool. I can't believe we have one. It was definitely one of those wants and not a need. But here it is. Yeah, we had a hard time sourcing the crane. There's not many in British Columbia that could do it. When Bill had it lifted up onto his structure, his watchtower that he had it on, there were no power lines around. But there's power lines there, and we came close to calling a helicopter to get it here. It was a long and very nervous day, but yeah, I don't know. I'm just going to walk over here a little bit, and I'm going to turn around, and I don't know if you can still see the horizon or not, but the Plaskett is. Can you wave, David? Can you see us? I won't shine a light up there. No lasers coming from our yard to get to spot you, but yeah, we're just really fortunate to have it here, and we're gonna get lots of years out of it, and we've got a little bit of work to do inside still. A little bit of water got in it over the years, but yeah, sorry for the shaky image, but there's Lisa waving. I could probably poke up if Lisa spins it right around, if we have time, David.
Oh yeah, you got some time.
Okay. If Lisa, if you can spin it right around to face the house. and I'll continue to use my shaky video here. So Bill, when he designed this, it was about 20 feet up in the air, and you entered through the bottom. With us and out of courtesy to our neighbors, we're keeping it down a little bit lower here. There's Lisa. I'll put the light on her there. So yeah, we're gonna hopefully do a lot of astrophotography out of here and have as many neighborhood friends over as we can. So
once we can do a little bit more of that.
Yeah. Oh, Lori says hi.
Hi.
Yeah. Does anyone have any questions at all, or do you have any questions, David?
No, it looks really, really nice. I mean, the last time I saw it, it was on stilts, so
yeah.
It looks kind of weird.
Yeah, it's the talk of the neighborhood, that's for sure. As I'm sure it was when Bill put it up. It was, and yeah, the whole neighborhood and the family all came from down island to come watch it drive away. And we had to, of course, talk to Saanich. We had to get oversized permits for the road, and it was probably the biggest thing in a while. It's gone down Prospect Lake Road, and there were a couple power lines that we were looking at very closely to make sure that we made it underneath them safely, and we did. So yeah, here we are.
Actually, I've got a question from Lori. Actually,
yeah,
she's asking, what telescope are you putting in there?
We actually, the last thing we have to do, we still have to pour the concrete for the pier. But we're gonna have a refractor in there, probably like a 120. And yeah, we're really real fortunate that Lisa's dad, before he passed away, he was just getting into astrophotography, and we were able to hang on to a lot of his equipment, and he was a very smart man, and he did his research, and so
well, I've seen the equipment, Cameron, and
yeah,
he had wonderful taste.
Yeah. It's the quality of our photos will have nothing. It will not be the equipment's fault. It will be there'll be pure user error, I'm sure, for the first few years. But there's lots of space and lots of things to take photos of, and lots of time to do it. And we have a beautiful old 12.5-inch Daub that he built. So that's sort of the crowd favorite. If we want to show people something, then that's the one that we will pull out on the lawn, and then a little bit more work goes into the photos. But with EAA, we're looking to really sort of bridge that gap between the two.
Yeah, I'm going to put you to work.
Yeah, sounds good. We're up for it. Yeah.
Actually, Lisa looks like she's at a concession or something like that.
Yeah.
I should be asking for a hot dog or something.
It's funny. Yeah, I'm pretty sure there may or may not be
some snacks out of here.
Yeah.
Maybe.
yeah. I'll take 2 beer, please. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, that's excellent, Cameron.
Yeah. I know. We're looking forward to
showing us.
Yeah. We're looking forward to sharing it with the community for sure.
Yeah. Excellent.
Yeah. All right. Thanks, David.
Okay. See you later.
Bye.
Yeah, that's so cool. I met Cameron and Lisa a couple of years ago, and yeah, it's an amazing story. It's wonderful that they're using Lisa's dad's equipment. It's a wonderful way to honor his passion. So I don't know, Brock, are you ready to go, or are you ready to show us some things? I don't see Brock here.
He's in the call, but I can't tell if he's ready or not.
All right. Okay. Just
hello. Yeah. Can you hear me?
Hi.
Is that
yes,
you,
we
Brock?
can hear you.
That's me.
Oh, that's you. Okay. Well, I think we have a great opportunity to showcase some of your stuff tonight. I am totally unprepared after this Venus debacle, though sure. We did get to see Venus for some time briefly, but I always have plan Bs and Cs, but by no means are you a lesser plan, Brock. Actually, Brock and I were kind of talking this afternoon about what we might do after this. I was thinking about doing some stars, like colored stars, and why color is a significant thing with stars. But I think I'm going to cut that off and let Brock show us some stuff. He does have a very nice red star tonight to show us. It's called Herschel's Garnet Star, and it's in a an interesting target called the elephant trunk. So take it away, Brock.
Okay. I'm going to show this here. It's actually the first picture is actually of an exposure, just a single frame. And it actually shows the star quite a bit better. Can you guys see that?
Yeah, it's in the bottom lower left corner.
Lower left corner, yeah. And then that's just one frame of many. And then after taking a huge number of frames pretty much overnight, the entire dark period last night, and stacking them all together. And actually this next shot I'll show you is actually rotated 180 degrees. So that same star will be up in the opposite corner. But basically you can see now Alpha or
Mu
Cephei,
yeah, Mu Cephei, or
Mu Cephei or whatever it is,
yeah,
is now up in that upper corner, and you can see the Elephant's Trunk Nebula quite clearly.
Yeah, I've tried to photograph this before, Brock, and I was kind of scratching my head this afternoon when you showed it to me, and I thought, oh, there's something funny here. I said, this isn't kind of normal. So I did ask you about this. What's your trick?
I don't know. I just point my telescope at it and took a picture.
Well, there's something interesting about your camera.
Well, yeah, there is. I mean, I use a DSLR. It's a Canon T3i, but I did some drastic surgery to it. I took it apart and removed a filter that removes. There's a filter in all DSLRs that takes out a lot of the red light to give better white balance in normal photography, but it also kills all the hydrogen alpha emissions. So
well, looks like you did a good job, but for the audience, we didn't tell you to do that, okay?
No. It was a used camera, so it was only a few $100 at risk. I've also got, when we had the last one of these meetings, I was doing some live stacking of a couple of galaxies, and I actually kept doing that through them a little bit later into the night. So I can also share that, and you can see how it ended up turning out. So you might remember me showing this one.
Is that in Leo?
I think it is, yeah. It's not far from Markarian's chain and all the rest of that stuff in Leo. There's tons of stuff in Leo. I don't remember exactly what it was.
Just as a side note, Leo, the Leo constellation is chock-a-block full of galaxies. It's kind of like the galaxy area, as long as also as in Virgo too, as well.
Mm-hmm. The galaxy on the bottom there is NGC 5566. I don't remember what the one on above it there is, but if you're trying to find it, at least that'll give you a clue.
That's an interesting thing. It looks like a reverse integral sign.
Yeah.
I just wanted to interject because there's a question in the chat. I don't know if you can see that, David.
Yes. So the question is, this is from Jonathan, actually, our UVic student here. It says, what focal length were you shooting at? And he said he loves your framing.
Oh, thanks. This is actually taken with the, I guess it's a 2350 millimeter Celestron 9¼ inch Schmidt Cassegrain, but it's also got a focal reducer, so I think it's 1645 millimeters effective.
Yeah,
and there's another picture.
It looks like your system is running quite nicely, given the length of the focal length of the telescope. Just for the audience's benefit, as the focal length of your telescopes get longer, it gets harder to make these things work.
Definitely gets more challenging. Another picture, actually, we were talking about all the galaxies in Virgo, part of the Virgo cluster, is this picture here, which was just a few days earlier than that other one. And this is Markarian's chain is visible in the right-hand side here. Mm-hmm. And then there's another cluster of galaxies throughout. I mean, this is this whole image actually, as you zoom in on it, the number of galaxies in it is pretty phenomenal.
Wow, that's
There's
amazing.
Galaxies just everywhere you look.
So how many
These are the
megapixels?
ones that are.
Yeah, how many megapixels is this? It looks like you can zoom in quite a bit.
Yeah, this would have been taken with a 6,000 by 4,000 pixel sensor.
Okay.
So I think it's 25 megapixels. This was taken with a Canon T7i, which isn't modified, so it doesn't have very good hydrogen alpha, but it does a trick. It does a better job on a lot of the galaxies because it's just a bit more sensitive and has a higher dynamic range. And then this picture is from just a few days ago as well. This is the Iris Nebula.
Oh, very nice.
That's a reflection nebula, which is actually kind of in the northern sky, just not far from the elephant's trunk.
Is that dark nebula as well, Brock?
Yes, there's a mix of reflection nebula and then dark nebula above and around it.
All right. Yeah, I'm not that familiar with dark nebula, but I've certainly seen people photograph it, and I just recently have been able to do more deep sky, and I have noticed it in a number of images. So yeah, the first time I saw it, I thought it was kind of weird. It looked like it was smeared or something. Yeah, I don't quite understand the exact nature of dark nebula, but I guess maybe one day somebody's going to tell us. Maybe somebody will kind of chime in here too as well.
Yeah.
Hey,
I can also share. I'm also
dark nebulae, bright nebulae that aren't lit up.
Yeah. Dark nebula are dense enough clouds that they essentially absorb all the light that would go through them. They can be seen through an infrared, but yeah, they tend to block a lot of visible light. Essentially, like clouds on a cloudy day, they block and scatter a lot of the sun's light. And if you get a whole lot of cloud, it gets pretty dark out.
Oh, you mean like tonight?
Yeah. this looks like a nebula with a bright young blue star in the middle, but the light doesn't penetrate far enough to illuminate the entire cloud.
Mm-hmm.
So you've got the dark region which is silhouetted against the sky.
This image here is actually live. This is Messier 13.
Mm.
Oh, very nice.
Ooh, Hercules' armpit. He has the best arm hair in the galaxy.
Aaron, you're going to have to tell a story about that sometime.
Yeah. We'll have to get a better camera setup because I need to move around a lot for that story.
Yeah.
Definitely once we get the planetarium going again.
Yeah, the Hercules cluster is one of my favorite. Actually, when you get a little bit more signal on the sky, you start seeing some red stars in there, and there's a feature called the propeller. I don't know if you can make it out, but I can sort of see it. It's kind of like a propeller shape. I think it's in around 8 o'clock here where you can see it. But once you get more signal there, you can see that as well.
Interesting.
Presumably, all the brighter stars there are red, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, very nice. Very popular cluster on the hill. I know many people have M13 as their favorite, and of course it's the bane of the people that see it over and over and over again. But I still like it.
Yeah. I figured it would be an easy one that's bright enough that with the sky not completely dark, it still stands out.
Yeah, it's getting pretty dark now.
Yes.
Yeah, something we should explain to people in terms of darkness. Astronomers really like to go at least for astronomical dusk. I mean, once the sun sets, it takes a good 2 hours before it gets really dark. So we're kind of pushing our luck here. But you've done a fine job, Brock. Lori says she likes M13. I'm paraphrasing.
Well, that's good.
So does anybody have any questions? Maybe questions about the equipment that's used for EAA? I should explain it again, EAA. Brock and I had a bit of a discussion about this afternoon, and the reality is the lines are blurring in terms of imaging and EAA. But the premise of EAA is quite different from hardcore imaging. With imaging, we're trying to do the best we can in terms of producing an image to show off the features of the target. In the case of EAA, it's meant to augment regular visual observing. So often we do these things without using the calibration frames that we so carefully make when we make final astrophotos. And we forget about doing those. And we typically maybe crank up the gain as well. And then we just do what is called live stacking. So basically we just accumulate the images that we capture roughly, much in the same way as we do the finished product. We actually do the same thing for a finished astrophoto. We capture many, many images. We run them through calibration frames, which remove defects like optical defects and systemic noise in the sensors. And then we stack them to sort of reinforce the signal. So in the end, we do it partway, and it's a different experience. And I don't know how you feel about it, Brock. Do you feel the lines are a bit blurry?
Yeah, I think a lot of it's kind of a little bit to do with what you're actually trying to accomplish. Like you could almost do the same thing, but if your purpose is to create an image that you can show off, and you're not that interested in really observing the thing, then it's more astrophotography. And if you're just kind of frustrated looking in your eyepiece and you wish you could see it better, and you're just literally using the same equipment to just see it as opposed to photograph it. I think and it's a hard thing to really draw a tight, clear line on. Like it's
yeah,
more about intent,
sometimes I think if it's an exceptional night, I may start off doing EAA, but I may just amp it up a bit by doing the calibration frames and then let it run if it's a good night. So
For
sometimes
sure.
I feel that these things are maybe even like artist's sketch. You start off with a sketch and just to get a sense for what you might want to do, and if you like it, you continue and finish it. So that's kind of like what it is for me.
Yeah, with the EAA you can get a quick look at it over the first hour of the night, and then you could just say, well, I'm tired, I got to work tomorrow, I'll go to bed, and let it run overnight, and by the time the morning comes you can stack it with some calibration.
Yeah, you kind of do one better, don't you, Brock? You schedule these things while you're sleeping. That's a smart thing to do.
Yes, well, I have to work, so I can't afford to be a complete zombie the next day.
Yeah, for sure. I get that, having worked a full career now, and yeah, there were some sleepless nights. Don't tell anybody. Yeah, it's kind of one of these almost seemingly insatiable hobbies, like you get kind of addicted by it. I know I do, because every time I have a little minor success, I want to kind of carry on, and even with the failures, it's still okay. It kind of makes you even work harder.
Very true.
Hey, I have a question for you. Is there any way to do EAA like stacking if you don't have a tracking telescope? Is there software that'll let you like sort of nudge your telescope along and register those images together?
Actually, Aaron, I think I've heard of something like that. I think maybe John McDonald might be better to answer that. But I also noticed that I was at a Nightscapers conference recently, virtually down in Utah, and they did speak about a couple of products that are used for stacking. Now, these are people that wouldn't normally use an astronomical mount for tracking. At best, they would use something called a tracker. And a tracker is really just kind of a budget astronomical mount. Some of them purely just work in right ascension. I won't go into the details of a full mount, which has both right ascension and declination movements, but these ones only have one movement. They just sort of follow the apparent movement of the stars. But they did mention some software where people could just take 30-second exposures. Now, this is the normal thing for nightscapers to do. They don't take really long exposures. They do 30-second exposures because typically, if you use a really wide-angle lens, you won't notice any star movement. So then at that point, the stacking comes about to really reinforce the signal. So yeah, I guess there are ways of doing that. And I think I've heard people talk about software that can even remove minor movement. So if you're only getting a little bit of movement, you can sort of push that single exposure for stacking later, and then stack them up. I'll see if I can find out what that is, and maybe on another session, another episode, I'll mention what that is. Jonathan, were you going to tell us something about star colors? Are you on the air, Jonathan?
Yep, I'm here. I can speak a bit about that.
Okay. What can you tell us?
Yeah. Actually, David, do you want to find us a star, an example while Jonathan's giving us a breakdown?
I don't know if I have any more examples. I was going to do them live tonight, but I'm not set up. But okay, Brock, are you able to pick up? Brock, are you able to pick up like Vega or one of the other stars? Is that easy to do?
I could try.
Is Alberio up? That would be a good example one.
I think it's too low down. I thought of doing that one, but I think it's too low down in the horizon. The summer triangle's not quite fully up yet. It might be a bit low for Brock to do.
I've got a lot of trees to the east.
You could try Vega. You could try Arcturus.
Arcturus is definitely up. It's way up high.
Let's try Arcturus. Arcturus is kind of a yellowy looking, orangey yellow looking star.
All right.
Yeah, go ahead, Jonathan.
All right, so I made a little comment in the chat about this earlier. So essentially, the color of a star is determined by its temperature. So stars are what we call black bodies. They radiate heat in a very specific way, dependent on their temperature. And this affects the wavelength of the lights that they emit. So by looking at the color of a star, we can have a pretty good estimate of how hot it is, with hotter stars being more blue and cooler stars being reddish orange. And the composition of a star can also affect its color as well. But the bulk of the mechanism behind it is because of its temperature, essentially.
Jonathan, I understand that the colors are often associated with this stellar evolution as well, the stage of life that a star is at. What can you tell us about that?
Well, let's see if I can remember my stellar evolution facts. So I guess stars like our sun, for example, they are essentially white. It looks yellow to us, but it's mostly white, and the yellow is mostly from the effects of the atmosphere scattering light. And that's it. It started its life as a white star, but as it progresses through its life, it'll start burning different elements in its core, and it'll turn into a red giant, and it'll swell in size. It'll cool down in temperature as it becomes more red, and eventually it's thought that it will swallow the Earth as it expands. So not anytime soon, fortunately. We have many.
So stars can change their color then?
That's right, they can. They can start burning different elements start fusing nuclear elements would be a more accurate term in the core. That can change the amount of energy that's escaping the star, and thus its temperature. And that changes the wavelength of light that it emits.
I think there's a whole spectral classification system, isn't there, Jonathan?
Absolutely. You can, if you look at a Hertzsprung-Russell diagram or an HR diagram, you'll see like little O, B, A, F, G, K, M, and sometimes LT at the end of it on the bottom. And those letters are essentially telling us the temperature of a star based on its color.
Yeah, I think they're arranged by degrees Kelvin or something like that.
I don't think there's actually a precise mathematical function for how far apart they are.
They actually started off with A, B, C, D, E, F, G. But then they found that some of them were duplicated and were not, and they weren't actually a temperature series. So they ended up with O, B, A, F, G, K, M, N, R, N, M, R, N, S. And you should point out that the star's temperature depends on its mass. That is, the more massive stars are much hotter and burn blue, whereas cooler stars like the sun, they're going to change in temperature, but not by a huge amount. The sun is slowly getting hotter and brighter, and will reach a few about 8,000 degrees, but it won't get hotter than that. Whereas stars with 10 solar masses burn much hotter than the sun, and they radiate in the blue. If you look at that's why you see blue stars in open clusters where the stars are much more massive. And the thing is that more massive stars are completely so much more brighter. They have to burn brighter to keep themselves up from the gravity that crushes it down. Like, you've got 10 times the mass of the sun, it's going to have 10 times the amount of gravity or more, right? In order to maintain that, the center gets much hotter, and so the whole thing burns an awful lot brighter. So you have stars going up to, tens of thousands of degrees on their primary hydrogen burning sequence. The sun will never get as hot as that, but it will also live for 12 billion years, while these hot, bright stars may live for as little as 2 or 3.
Yeah, thanks for that, Ben. So Brock just brought up Arcturus, so you can see the kind of an orangey yellow color. I can't remember what class Arcturus is. It might be, is it a K?
Yeah.
K class?
K3.
K3,
K.
Yeah. I just wanted to pipe in here with a little bit of the history on these classifications. So they were, as Ben mentioned, originally not set up by temperature. They were actually set up by spectral features. So they were classified by like the strength of the hydrogen lines, or other like prominent spectral features like oxygen, that sort of thing. And so they were classified into like an alphabetical system, A, B, C, D, blah, blah, blah. And a lot of that work was actually carried out by a computer named Wilhelmina Fleming.
Oh, interesting.
Computer in the sense of a person who computes. This is a common job for women in the late 1800s. And she classified over 10,000 different stars in this system. And then later on, it was revised as they figured out that these spectral features depended on the temperature of a star. So different parts of different hydrogen lines become more or less prominent at different temperatures. And other spectral features become more and less prominent as well. So that's where we get the current OB, FG, KM. OB, a fine girl kiss me. Yes.
Okay. Well, thanks. Yeah, I think we'll over time we'll over the season, especially during the brighter parts of the season. I think we'll probably head and look at some more stars as well. Hopefully I'll be better prepared next time and I won't be stymied by Venus. By the way, if people want to watch Venus set, you can certainly do that. Just wait until the sun is safely set and look for it. It'll be around for a little while. It's an evening star. Well, not really a star, but evening planet.
The red star that was in that first photo that I showed, Mu Cephei, or the garnet star, I read that its size, because it's such an old bloated red giant or whatever it is, it's bigger than it would if it was in our solar system. It would go out past Jupiter.
Yeah, I've always been amazed by that star, because I really haven't had a chance to look for it visually, but I know, like, when I imaged the elephant trunk, I just noticed it's just amazingly red star there. And it really shows in your photograph for sure.
And actually, recently, up until recently, we thought that Betelgeuse also extended out past the diameter of Jupiter, but there's some recent a recent paper that figured out that I think we were catching a bit too much of the like extended dust cloud around Betelgeuse that it's throwing off, and so if you actually like correct for that, it's quite a bit smaller, like only about a third of the way out to Jupiter. So it's not quite the monster we thought.
What we do know is that nearly all red giants, if not all of them, lose mass, and so they all have dust clouds around them of some kind or another. If you look at M13 in one of those beautiful, or Omega, the cluster you just saw, in a nice color image, you'll see a lot of very bright red stars. Those are red giants, and then a bunch of slightly dimmer blue stars. And those are called horizontal branch stars, and they are burning helium and hydrogen at the same time in different parts of the star. But the thing is that they wouldn't be blue if they hadn't lost most of their envelope. So that's how they are the phase of evolution that follows the red giant phase. So that's how we know that a fair fraction of red giants, all red giants probably lose some mass, but some lose an awful lot of mass, nearly their entire envelope, while they puff up to be that big.
Hey, Ben,
yeah,
sorry.
Ben, the only reason why we know this is because we see different examples of these things, right? We can't necessarily follow a single star, obviously.
Well, that's right. So if we look at M13 or Omega Centauri, which is the biggest globular cluster in the Milky Way galaxy, what we see is a sequence of bright stars that go from red to blue. And what we know from theoretical modeling is that all of these stars are burning helium. And it turns out that because of the way red giants form, red giants die and become horizontal branch stars. They all have cores that are about the same size. So they all have helium cores that are burning at about the same rate. But what is different about them is the size of their envelopes. And the ones with large envelopes are red, and the one with small envelopes are blue. They're all the same kind of star, but they have varying envelope sizes. And we see in globular clusters, we see sequences of these stars. So we see both red ones and blue ones, sometimes both in the same cluster. And so these are pretty well understood now, and have been since the late 60s as the remnants of red giants. And they then become red giants again after the helium is exhausted in the core, and before they become planetary nebulae and then white dwarfs.
Sorry, Ben, I think you might be a little off on that.
Oh, really? I did a PhD on this.
Well, okay. My understanding was that a lot of the blue stars were blue stragglers, not horizontal branch.
No, that's not true, Aaron. The blue stragglers are from coalescent. They're a lot fainter than horizontal branch stars. They come off of the main sequence, and they look a bit like slightly slightly younger stars. The horizontal branch stars are a highest sequence higher up in the higher up in the brightness stage.
Okay.
If you look in the ultraviolet, they're extremely bright. You can see these in Hubble Space Telescope diagrams.
I shall have to look up, do some more research on that, apparently.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
I learn a lot about these sessions, you know.
Yeah.
It's wonderful.
Yeah. Now, it is 11 o'clock, so we may have to start wrapping up here. Is there anything else you'd like to?
Yeah, is there anything else you wanted to say, Jonathan?
I don't think so.
All right. Yeah, we'll see Jonathan again when we do the astrophotography episode of the virtual star party.
Mm-hmm.
And thanks again, Brock, for bailing me out. So the Venus thing, definitely try it yourself safely. Wait till the sun sets. But other than that, I think I love these sessions. I learned so much. I'm probably, as I tell everybody, I'm more mechanic than I am astronomer. So this is wonderful.
Hey, Aaron, can I show you something quickly?
Yes.
So, can you see my? Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Yeah, you can.
This is the globular cluster M80. Globular cluster NGC 6093. It's well known for having a lot of blue stragglers, and it also has a very pronounced horizontal branch. That's the helium burning stars I was just talking about. If you look at it on the HR diagram, this is a Hubble heritage picture from I forget when we did this. It was probably cycle 5, so 1992, 4 or 5. Anyway, so here is what it looks like. Here are the blue stragglers, and here are the
Gotcha. Okay. Yes. Yes, I see what you mean.
Yeah, this is actually M55. It says, but M80 has a similar set.
Gotcha.
Okay.
Wonderful.
Cool.
Well, as I say, thanks, Jonathan. Thanks, Brock, and Cameron. Cameron and Lisa, if you're still out there, thank you as well. So I guess we'll meet again in a couple of weeks.
Yeah. Thank you as well to Nienke and Calvin and Amy as well, and Lori, everyone who contributed this evening.
Thanks everybody on Zoom, hanging out with us on Zoom and hanging out with us on YouTube. Yeah, it's been good so far. And I think our next one is June 12th.
June 12th with
James DeFrancesco.
Yeah.
Yes.
So yeah, stay tuned for that.
And
like and subscribe.
July 10th, we've got another treat coming. We've got Spaceman Steve, who is a former UVic grad, who's now at the East Station Observatory in Hawaii, and he's going to talk us about where baby stars come from.
Oh, I guess we'll have to have the talk then.
Yeah.
All right, I think that does it from us at the center of the universe. I think I'm going to close off the streams. Thank you,
birds
everybody.
in the beehive cluster.
Good night. All right.